Okay. No. That's weird. I'm just going to check that. For some reason, I have a Okay, yes, hello. We did finally start. I know this is a lot later than initially projected. I was going to come in earlier, but then it took a while to actually get back, and now I'm actually wondering if to make the stream today at all, and I'll completely cancel it and postpone it, I guess, till tomorrow. If only because I had this whole thing planned out of what to do, but the problem is more so that I kind of want to at least have someone actually watching, if and if that's not possible, then I might have to reschedule to a time when it is possible. So I'm just going to wait a bit still and hope someone else comes in. So I'm just going to, because I have everything set up here for what I had in mind. It's annoying because I already have things clearly set up. Sorry. And yet I'm waiting, and I've had actually people ask me about the stream, and I sent them the link, and some of them just can't seem to make it, despite having asked me about it and having been on previous ones. So that's a bit of a problem. So I'm just going here, and I'm just going to wait a little bit, hopefully, for someone to actually show up. In which case, I will actually procure. Procure a copy of Erwin Rosenberger's The King of Thieves that I've currently been reading, and read a little of it, and hope that somebody actually shows up so we can start the proper reading. I'm just going to make sure. Dies alles sei Tavala tot ist, der edle Tavaka, der ein Behuter meiner Kunstgüter war und sorgsam die Augen offen hatte, dass die Hässlichkeit, sei sie an Steinholz oder anderen Stoff gebunden, nicht in mein Haus hereinschlüpfe. Sorry, I'm just I'm just reading this little thing. I was actually wondering whether I could potentially get away with doing a German language stream. Well, I'm just going. I am here. There's been only a couple of minutes, so let's say we wait until it's 10 minutes before we start, so about 6 more minutes. And then we can actually start properly. I'm sorry for the delays here. I was going to come in a bit earlier, but then it took a while to even get food at all, and I ate half of it, but it's weirdly not sitting well with me. I guess it's just because of the fact that it was actually... I haven't had beef for a while, so it definitely hit me a bit unexpectedly. Das ist ein Blick wie ein Schneider war, wenn es galt, ein Haar zu ziehen. Ich muss einen Ersatz für Tabaka haben und ich frage dich, Kalidasa, ob du mir einen Mann nennen kannst, der die Eigung hätte, eine Schönheit kündiger Ware und wäre meine Gebildschätze zu sein und auch ein Leisten für die Kunst des Landes. Oh, wohl weiß ich einen solchen Ries Kalidasa in heller Begeisterung, der Ravideva, der vor nicht Zeit mit Weib und Kind aus fernen Bergen zu uns kam. Er ist sicherlich nicht der, den du suchst, gleichwillig eilen von ein Antlitz zu bringen. Okay. See now, we still have about 4 minutes to wait. Like I said, I'm going to wait until that time at least. Okay. Okay. I am a little afraid that if nobody shows up for a bit more, I'm going to have to completely cancel the stream, postpone it to tomorrow, and then private it so as to not have a stream where no one shows up on the channel publicly visible. It kind of would be a little bit embarrassing, all things considered. I mean, I'm trying very hard here. But, oh yeah, it doesn't show waiting stats anymore for that because it's already airing. So I can't really use that. Oh. Okay. So about 2.5 minutes left until I can hopefully start. So yeah, in less than 2.5 minutes. Well, hopefully. Who knows? Und Kalidasa sprang unverzüglich zur Schwelle, denn er war so geartet, dass aus seiner Seele leicht ein Eifer aufflammen konnte. Halt an, gebot der Herrscher, lass mich meinen Rat erst ein Weilchen bedenken. Und senkte das Kinn zur Brust, schloss und sagte dann, nicht dem Ravide, bringt mich her. Sein Weib. Frage nicht, König den Dichter. Im Fragen ist Verzögern, im Verzögern ist Widersprechen, Gehorchen und Eile. Okay. So about half a minute before we can start. So I'm not Okay then. It turns out we're not at 0 anymore, so I don't have to actually abort the stream and then delete it from the channel to save myself the embarrassment. Because I ended up, well, someone else came in, at least temporarily, so I believe I actually can start. I'm just going to open up the thing that I had specifically selected for this. Now, which one? Oh, yes, this one. This one is, we're going to actually start with some more Martindale, but I'm actually going to read a story that I was looking for beforehand from the same collection before the title story, but I couldn't remember what it was. But I've actually found it since. So specifically, it's called Unchanging Lucky Daimon, and I'll have to just zoom in a little bit. So let me see. It starts off with a quote in French that I don't, from Montaigne, that I don't actually know what it says. Sorry about that. But the following second quote it starts with is, O divine Comatas, I would that thou and I beneath this broken sunshine this leisure day might lie. Now lift the lid a minute, now Dorian shepherds speak, two minds shall flow together, the English and the Greek. From Ionica. Now, well, I've never learned French, so I'm sorry. Does this bore you? Said the restless Archie, sitting down beside me on the grass and stretching long flannelled legs to the sun. I should be more excited, I answered, if I knew the people playing. School matches aren't enormously interesting if you don't, especially if you're too blind to see the details. And then the sun and the smell of the grass always make me sleepy. Can you smell the grass? He said wonderingly. Of course, I answered, closing my eyes. The wind floated over the wide cricket field, carrying with it all sorts of delicious perfumes. Very subtle was the scent of the mown grass, and from the meadows beyond, for the oval sank away on the further side from the great hayfields, came the drier customary odour of the hay, in which the sweetness of clover was quite distinguishable. In wider gusts came the fresh, exquisite fragrances of an enormous stretch of country, bathed in sunshine bathed in sunlight and wind and all the gaiety of an English afternoon. I opened my eyes again to watch the low lines of hills, pale brown and golden green, shadowed with brooks. Down the valley they evaporated into sunlight. Just at the foot of the meadows ran the Ur, flashing silver here and there among its woods, and yonder, spreading out into delicious shadows, silver and olive over the gravel. Archie and I were sitting on a bank, the pavilion to our right, some way off, a low building with a veranda propped by wooden columns painted white. And, I said, I can smell the oil you oiled your back with, and I believe the wood too. How awfully odd, said he, and yawned. I believe you'd bored yourself, I said. I'm a bit fed up with cricket, to tell you the truth, he answered. Too much of it this term. And all the out matches are finished. Only 10 more days, thank heaven. Where are you going? Scotland after a bit for some shooting. I suppose you'll be sorry to leave, though. In a way, I'm a bit fed up. I want some liberty. You're much freer than you used to be, you know. Think so? It's a barracks all the same, said he laconically. Go about in herds. Aristotle, said I, with mock pomposity, says man lives by twos and not by packs. So I suppose you've got some friends you'll be sorry to see the last of. He made no answer, and just then a wicket fell. Oh, my lord, he exclaimed, did you see that? And I'm the next wicket down. Better go for my pads. Who's the sandy-haired kid in now? I asked. Young Leonidas, he said, in colourless woe. Then I looked round at him. Pal of yours? I asked. Back in a second, he said, vouchsafing no reply. With eyes half shut against the sun, I watched him stroll towards the pavilion. The hot air quivered upwards each time the wind paused. The tips of the firs waved and bowed. The grassy levels seemed to undulate. as the white figure, already unrecognizable to my short sight, strolled across them. How odd, said I to myself, to decorate a cricket pavilion with Doric columns. Yes, Doric, but of course, the statues is just what I'd heard. If this really is the centre of the whole place they're so proud of. If only Archidamus. At that moment I observed that he had returned and was standing beside me. Archidamos, said I, is this then the amphitheatre, and is that colonnade the Choros? Come with me, Macedonian, he answered. With difficulty indeed, yet I have obtained permission from my father to escort you. Why did you need permission, Archidamos, and why was it difficult to obtain? Permission, dear guest, said he, helping me to rise, is necessary before ever doing anything. That is invariable, and especially the Spartans do not love much visiting of strangers in their city. But you, Philetairos, were my father's host of old, and may not be refused. You shall see all in order. But that I should be your escort, that was difficult, for among us the youths are trained to silence and to seclusion among themselves. We may not easily speak with strangers, even now that I would travel to Macedon, or even Athens, were impossible. Why impossible? I urged. He walking sedately at my side, eyes cast down, hands quietly folded in his cloak. And why again was this permission granted to you? Oh, wide nostrilled on the trail, cried he. In a month of days I should ask fewer questions. Yet I shall answer doubtless, in answering at least I may be I. Well, first it was once our law to stay here, in hollow like a diamond, untainted by the customs and corruptions of the other Greeks. We left it but to fight. We would learn naught from Athens, nor from Corinth at our doors, nay, nor Boeotia. Should we travel and behold the fair things of Hellas, we would weary of our land, they held, and our ancient ways. We should taste their license and wax wanton and act insolently. So indeed, I consented, did your Pausanias, victor of Platae, and your gallant Brasidas, who so buffeted Athens of old, till slain by Cleon, he destroyed thus the pestle and mortar wherein your states were pounded. And so Lysander, all these your noble generals, drunk with new sights and places, stung by the gadfly of freedom, proved themselves weaklings at heart and undisciplined, incontinent. Bribes, crowns, plottings with the foe, what of this but must be mentioned in regards of all of them? The Athenians, he gloomily retorted, are no better. But, said I, glancing askance at the boy, they do not claim to give an education so extraordinary as is yours. At yours always their philosophers have marvelled. Even when they condemn, they perceive it to be a training indeed, based upon reasoning and most curiously knit together in all its parts, an accurate drill for mind and spirit, perchance a failure in results, perchance hateful in its details and defying, or ignoring the true nature of the soul, yet an exact system and as much to be honoured. But now, said he, rather feverishly, the joints are being loosened, it falls apart. Once we used their iron money to keep us separate, now we trade freely. Once we held of necessity to our ancestral plot, now all ties of earth and family and tomb and altars are being snapped. Once self-sufficient we governed ourselves, and freed others and broke the powers, Philetairos, even of Athens when she played tyrant. Now we travel, we copy, we are different in each place, and have striven now here, now there ourselves to play the despot, and our harmonists everywhere lay yokes on conquered cities. Let us not, said I, refining on the problems of history, ascertain whether indeed you or Athens did most for freedom. Rather tell me, Archidamos, why you have permission to escort me, and why it was difficult or peculiar in the getting. I am a degenerate son, said he, and my father himself would be held by my grandsire no true Spartan. I belong to years of change. Myself I need change to pacify me. My father gives me what your grandsire would deny, some tiny freedom, and my grandsire would deny some tiny freedoms. Yet what avail that in a few days? I shall go to Skotos for the hunting. The mountains are different, but within the house all is ever as it was. Yes, hearken, that scarce one of us born Spartans should ever read. I would fain read. I am sick of the laws and customs taught to us in question and answer verses, and of the tales of great men dead, that I know by heart, and again sing in the chorus. The Athenian theatres, I have heard of their bold poets and their mysterious brood of philosophers. Even to have heard that in Sparta seems unequalled. But we had been talking for the last few minutes in Sparta's one wide street, Aphetai, like a huge wall. Taygetos towered above us some 25 furlongs westward. Purple-black it towered, scarred with ravines and gorges and crowned with snows most stainless. This group of unwalled villages, this Sparta I had loved to read of and now saw, this group of unwalled villages, this Sparta I had loved to read of and now saw, stood on 5 little hillocks in their broad saucer of rich soil, and on north and east the west bed of the Eurotas, in which the water ran rapidly over gravel made a shield of silver with green shadows, where olives and willows and fruit trees bowed luxuriously along its edges. Nearer us the river parted and enclosed an island densely wooded with plane trees. Here, said he, between the dancing place and the gymnasium is the Persian colonnade. Look, Mardonius, that speaks of Platae, when Pausanias, still uncorrupted, conquered him. And look, Artemisia, the Halicarnassian queen. That is for Salamis, where Athens and Sparta still fought side by side. Yet even there, treachery, naught great has been done since Marathon. Let it pass, said I. Even to Marathon you came late, and in Athens were traitors ready to admit the meed. Such is human life. Shifting is it, and never the same. And if you seek to find it true to itself throughout, you will lose hope and condemn it, methinks, for essential rottenness, which were impiety. O flexible even as an Athenian, your rule for right and wrong is leaden and yields. You bend and elude and achieve your ends exquisitely ever, yes, yet by lies. Look yonder at our huge statues of the Lacedaemonian people, stranger. A man, a warrior, heavy-armed. Not for nothing is their great image shining over Athens, in woman's likeness, all-mighty goddess. Them the maiden protects, and something of women's wits have they, subtle, unscrupulous, and a woman's wheedling tongue. Flashing, shifting, lawless as the sea is their wit, and our mind holds the deep knowledge of the firm earth. Down the street we passed, glancing at statues and shrines and sepulchres on each side, and moving westward it was a joy to read there the great names I knew, Brasidas near the theatre, and opposite Leonidas, brought hither some years after his glorious death at Thermopylae, and buried. I have spoken harshly of your countrymen of times, said I. Here is one whom I wholly honour, Leonidas. And though awakened from a dream, he looked up quickly. Leonidas? No, he is buried yonder, out by their house below Taygetos. But look, I urged, see his name, see the spear, the graven name of those who fell against the Persians. Oh, that Leonidas, he answered abstractedly. What other? Said I. He said briefly he had a friend of that name. This snapped our conversation abruptly, and as I struggled to recover myself, I realized that Archie was offering me some food. I thought you might like some cake, said he, holding out a curious spongy substance, streaked with yellow, pink, and brown, and encased in a chalky sugar icing. And here's this. I eyed the vivid crimson bottle apprehensively. Raspberry champagne, he said solemnly, rather decent. Thanks enormously, said I, and fell to. During the summer term, said he, we tea down here. It's economical except during the strawberries, because brewings in one's room always come expensive, because you always have eggs or sausages or something. I say, come down and have a bath after this is over. Right, I said. I like your room this term better than the one last year, I added. Not bad, he agreed, topping view. His room, as I recalled it, was a pleasant and masculine place, heterogeneous as to ornaments, but these had come from an affectionate patronage of leaving auctions than from personal preference. A few photographs of friends and of horses, 2 placards of motors leaping through the air at incredible speeds, a picture of Miss Flossie Foljambe smiling perseveringly across a film of dust. Not the stage, evidently, was first in fascination for my respected friend. Else a confused medley of books, athletic implements, and clothes, for Archie's tastes were manifold and excluded neither Greek grammars nor picturesque pyjamas. Yet the relative austerity of the room interested me. Most of my friends added to the mass of steel and wooden machinery exacted by the vast complication of modern athletics, half the equipment of a boudoir and of a fair-sized tea and shirt shop. Archie too loved luxury, but with a difference. The spires of cigarette smoke I was blowing helped my meditation. Sorry, just checking the chat again. Okay, here we go. The landscape swam a little, and after a pause I asked him when he wanted me to come and bathe. After the games are finished, we shall find everybody bathing, he answered. Today it is allowed. As a rule, one bath a day only, but always in the morning. Even in the winter, I asked, shuddering. Hollow like a diamond for all its sheltering hills could be, I was sure, bitterly cold. And the Eurotas, though I didn't suppose it froze, must rush furiously, swollen by the torrents that streak Taygetos. Of course, said he, it is splendid to buffet the current. It is splendid to buffet the current, to conquer across. But some are drowned, he placidly added. And after it, do you still wear that one garment only? Nothing more, said he, hands still clasped beneath the unbleached wool. I could not suffer that, said I. We are taught so from the first, one dress winter and summer, no shoes, yet Macedonian are we fleeter barefoot than the Athenians in sandals, and our food black soup and bread, little else save on the farms. Slaves may stuff, helots may get drunk, see their blotched and puffy faces. That is right for them. We need no lamp to walk by o' nights. They may lie if they will on fleeces. We have our bulrush mats. We are nobles. Every true Spartan is a noble. He is self-sufficient once, with birth. He has had training. Yet, I ventured, I feel your training harsh. And what if the helot should be trained? The helot, he laughed for answer, and harsh. To some there is harshness in the casting sickly infants forth to perish on Taygetos. But if a child lives and thrives, well, custom governs the soul. Straightway in boyhood the state governor takes us from the soft care of women. We live in batches, and there is the whip to tame us as we are we restive. He laughed again. If he be absent, older youths, prefect chastise us. If he be absent, older youths, prefects, chastise us. Failing these, any senior may rebuke us. Nor may we retort or be angry. That were disgrace, and punishment were doubled. In no possible circumstances, traveller, are we left entirely to ourselves. Why, even when passing into the military age, we go in herds under yet other captains. Is your own home nearby? I asked, anxious to see the nurseries from which the lad so soon had been expelled. We passed it a moment since, said he, stopping and pointing back to the quiet house he had crossed without a sign. It stood with its fellows outside the centre of the city, which consisted practically of the Aphetite street only, with black, narrow, and most ancient alleys running off it, one saw not whither. These airy, separate buildings, calm and noiseless, struck me with awe. Serene, unchanging, content with the old ways, they bred men to the loneliness of a life never lived alone, to the solitude of the soldier, but scarcely to the interior isolation of the initiate. For what furious explosion might not lives, so massed backed upon themselves, be concentrating their strength? Here, at any rate, were the houses of the kings, no different from their fellows, with doors of axe-hewn planks, without knocker, so that here, as always, you must needs shout for entrance. But now we passed these too, and descended to the Eurotas, crossing my bridge out the Youth's Island, with its rampant of plane trees. This is where we play football, said he. Here Leonidas was killed. The game is a fight to prepare boys for battle later. At that bridge many have been injured by kick or tooth or fist or even slain. But that is barbarism, I cried, shocked though a northerner. It is the custom, said he coldly. It prepares us. It were shame to be an odd man, left out because none would pick us, a craven at the hunt, in gymnastics in the dance. Hunting and gymnastics are good, I said, for they develop courage in the rhythm of the body, and song and dancing not only honour the god, but rhythm into the soul. But your other games are destructive, and only the evil is there. No, said he, danger sharpens the wits. He is praised who steals most cheeses from Artemis Orthia. He who fails must sing a mocking song against himself, a bitter jest. And many are flogged at her altar till they faint or even die, for none laments himself. So too when older we are sent a thieving to establish courage and cunning. Then we go secretly to surprise and slay the helots, if any appear too strong or comely or rebellious. I do not wonder, said I, that your gods and goddesses stand in their images spear in hand, and that your very Aphrodite goes armed. You nation of blood and war, your patron Apollo is a warrior bard. His lyre is harsh and angry, and he knows naught of wedlock. True enough, he said, we are bidden be soldiers and better than our sires. We have a game, the old men or those who act them sing, and the grown men and striplings answer. Once we were stalwart youths, that now we are. Try us as thou wilt, but we shall some day be better. We shall some day be still better men. For this is all our training, early from our homes, never in the marketplace. Our very workshops are not ours. For this we exercise our body from neck to ankle. For this common life, common food, ceaseless inspection. We marry late, we ask for married children, not soft dalliance. Wherefore a husband rarely meets the wife who is but to breed him children unto Sparta. If she fail, she'll welcome one to make good her failure. The aged or crippled husband shall himself seek a new partner for his bride. Throughout our city we seek one colour, one mind. Each is like his fellow, we are peers, we live, we fight. Money is for the tradesfolk living around us, enjoyment and work are for slaves. Your life, I said, is one long insolence to nature, who will have revenge. Man was not made for himself only. Athens trains her wits, you your limbs. Will neither of you know how to love? Leonidas, he began, suddenly tossing up his hands. The little fool, he growled, swiping like that. Boundary, but deuced bad play, downright swank. He'll be in love with himself over that stroke and send up a catch in a second and get out. Anyhow, I shan't be in with him, thank heaven. But the appalling thing happened. Leo batted quite steadily for an over, but his companion got bold, and Archie rose, scowling quite too angrily, I thought. Why are you so sick? I asked. I hate looking a fool, said he, batting with that kid. Good luck, Archibald, said my other neighbour. Pleasant innings. Go to blazes, retorted the inexplicable Archie. Why does Dammer object to his fellow batsmen so much? I asked. They grinned and looked awkward and offered me some cherries, and I subsided. Archie, however, batted very quietly, and soon the rhythm of his strokes and the leisurely running entered into my brain, and the landscape flickered to my eyes. It was the ripple of Eurotas that flickered there. The leaves of the plane trees, with the sunlight filtered through them, dappled the water yet further into a green and gold. Archidamos at my side was leaning forward, quiet again, and gazing at the waters. I will tell you about Leonidas, he said. You know we elder boys are, if not the gods favour us, each an inspirer to some younger boy who hears us. We are to speak to him more potently, they hope, than our austerer elders. You said we could not love. Love. I had seen instance after instance of what you doubtless would call love, and I had called it madness. Then came my turn. It was at the feast of the Hyacinthia. I had caught the lad's voice singing in a hymn of honour to the hero. Oh, I knew him well enough, and I had observed sweet voices often, but now somehow his diamond was in the voice. The he himself, though I could scarcely see him, my throat, my breast, I knew I must look for him as he descended the steps. O Macedonian, I thought to see the hero Hyacinth himself, so golden as he descended through the sunlight was his hair, and his eyes were the blue of hyacinths. For the first time ever I noticed eyes, and I saw how shall I say, how his skin was woven. He saw me too and blushed, casting his eyes down. Yet why I had said naught. Some god had leapt between us, and after that I could not but seek him, not confessing my purpose, but cheating myself with excuses. But when he caught me looking, I frowned, and on his side he feared me, and sought me and shrank, and we lived each out of himself and in each other's mind, yet we spoke not. And on a day I was set next to him in a chorus, and he might have been Medusa, so would I not look at him. And I sang false, and my head whirled, and I was thought by the chorus leaders sun-stricken. And soon who put in his plea gifts, figs, and other fruit in his place. And once a quail, and a tame squirrel and a bow I had made, and he played with them openly before me, that I might see, but dared not speak, nay, nor himself confess that he knew. Sorry, I lost my place for a second. And another day I heard him speaking to his friend Cleomenes, my cousin, and said, O Cleomenes, he said, deliver me from the anger of Archidamos, for he hates me. I am a hatred to him when he sees me at the games or hears me sing. On his account I miss the bail, I strike the note awry. Yet must I indeed never see him? For I love him, he is so strong and so powerful for running and in boxing and leaping and throwing the disc. And once he kicked me, for he hates me at football, and I love him for it, and leaned on the bruised ankle of the heavier. Oh, tell me, my Cleomenes, if indeed he hates me for my part. Did he not hate me, I would be utterly his slave. I would be his helot, and yet would I be a god, doing all things well for him. Now I do it all ill because of him. And Cleomenes came to me and said, but he came not twice. He broke off harshly and resumed at once. And to Leonidas I spoke never, and he was killed in the game, because I being near, he fell into distraction, was thrust aside, and could not avoid the thrust, and was thrown askew as his neck broke in its socket. In Macedonia, O my friend, I answered gently, came once to live a philosopher, one of the race you envy, having somewhat of a deeper vision into truth, who spoke much of these things. What then did he say? I cannot recall his words, but let us talk and trust to our talk's guidance. Friendship, or Archidamos, he believed, was of all things most necessary to life. In all that lives is that which draws one unto another. Hence flocks and herds exist. Hence cities arise. Hence I, travelling, perceive each man to be kith and kin to all men. Nay, cried he, I am no kin to helots. Even so, thought he, man may not love the aged, nor the ugly, nor the wholly disparate. And indeed, passion must first shake the soul, and passion is based on sweetness, and sweetness goes with beauty, yet not always. Have you not often wondered how such a one could tolerate for friend another so ill-favoured? Often, he said, and even as at Leonidas some mocked, and I, what had I? What was I that he? Hush, I cried, in all that lasts somewhat there is, though hidden, wherein twain may share. Is it that I have what you have, and love and join you in it? Or that I lack what you possess, you, what is mine, and so, contributing each to other, we create a whole. Thus the sage declared that princes could meet no love, for they lack naught, being princes. Alas, cried he, they may lack this very thing, love. To Leonidas I was a prince, yet naught he fancied to offer me. Yet hungered I for him. Thus should a prince love. Ye, and love is a beggar. Could the beggar man and love a beggar? Could the beggar man give him love? Hence none, if they but love, need be too low to meet with love, nay, not a helot. I'm sorry if I'm going on a bit. This one's a bit lengthy and slightly unrelated, but I am specifically reading it because I did enjoy this sort of a time and reality shifting perspective it has, which is something I hadn't really read from this time period. But it is a little long-winded in this regard, I will admit, and definitely not as stirring, but we only have a few as the others from this collection that I've read before, but we're almost done with it. So bear with me a little. Let's see, yes, here we go. Hence none, yes, okay. And none too high, answered he very slowly. Nay, not a god. Yet my philosopher, I continued, tempting him, taught men to pray not too much good for their beloved, not thus that he should become a god. The gulf would grow impassable. Not, said he, should one oneself move Godward. Lo, how you solve the riddle. Yet, said I, talking to myself, if my beloved move faster than I Godward, shall he not slay my love? No, for may I not love my memories? Once we were together and equal sufficiently. Even should I sink backwards from the godlike, neither will his love perish. May he not love a hope? May he not love to help? I love Leonidas, said he, recovering himself. Not from this reason or that, nor for this or that purpose, but suddenly and absolutely. It was he, it was I. I live not by choice or argument. Love is like life. Listen, said I. The passion indeed that must underlie and may pass upward into love is swift. It springs from that blind thing in us which may not be destroyed. Thus you may find yourself shamefully, most of you would fancy, enamoured, yes, of a Helot himself, perchance, unloving. There are dark myths in Hellas that dream of this. Pacify, Europe. Hush, said he. My mind is angered by these topics. Well is that, I answered, and indeed the passion, springing as I said, comes swift and may go fleetly, but its triumph is destruction. My Archidamos, even its brief, trivial triumph that men jest at, is destructive. First in the beloved, it is sweet unconsciousness that perishes. The sad conscious, the strut, the smirk, how loathsome. Intolerable he becomes for very vanity, while still he is fair. Intolerable for soured lowliness when his hour is over. Thus, O lover, though you boast your guiltlessness, though shocked should one call you harmful, unguessing, yet you have murdered in your beloved somewhat most subtly fair, meant for his happiness. O fools, to think corruption is due to mere outside, that is, lacking all is well. Long ago the elusive and all-important thing has been spiritually spoilt, a withered soul, or Archidamos, a withering soul. Again in the lover, it is the use and enjoyment of the present and life that is lost. Distracted is he, maimed for action, diamonds are in his brain. And believe me, he who squanders himself over such forms of passion friendship has expended all his treasures, and when in due time his whole self is demanded of him, and all his riches of love, he has nothing left to give. Meanwhile, among his fellows, that sacred thing, love, is being laughed at in its caricature, and all manner of hateful irreverence is shown to it, whereas of so delicate a thing no ribald tongue should speak, and on it scarcely the soul's eye look. Sorry, just 6.5 more pages. I just want to finish this one for conclusion. I didn't realize it was this slightly meandering, and I apologize a bit if it's slightly taxing to the attention. But to finish, few among us dare, he said, flushing, to bandy words about such as love truly. Base love we hate overmuch to laugh at it. All this talk Macedonian displeases me. Yet, said I, these are growths in the soul's garden. Do not disdain them. Meanwhile, however, often the passion turns to its contradictory, and he who once made you drunk with love now fires you to downright hate. So it was with my brother, said he. He was inspired to Agesilaus, and then on a sudden lo, he could not bear his name. What is this? Enough, I said. Love dawns slowly through the cloudy passion, or must live long before it can be distinguished as love. Love based on profit is called love only by a lie. It dies with the prophet's death. So love sprung merely from pleasure goes rotten when the pleasure sickens, and the soul falls apart into shreds of love and hate, and hard it is, once the soul is sick, to slay in it even a hated passion. The very sickness of love is loved and loathed. May you never be slave, dear friend, to a sick pleasure. Whence then is love that is true and immortal? From the permanent only a permanent love issues. Hence to have dwelled together, forging links of custom, is helpful for most lovers. Even the sight of the beloved's face, for such are we, that what is not seen is swift forgotten, and without the enshrining features the enduring soul is lost to us. O Philotirus, what then is the permanent? For I still love Leonidas, though he is not with me, but the love is sweet. This love then sprung from sweetness endures, though the beloved be gone. No, Archidamos, the pleasant is not because it is so sweet the evil, nor indeed is Leonidas truly gone. But wait, it is true that the good only is the lasting, for it is the real, the self, the essential. I am sorry. I do believe, actually, still about 6 pages of this. Okay, I definitely think that I'm just going to have to take an executive decision and just skip this because as much as I like this concept, the shifting perspective, whatnot, you seem to have been overjoyed. I'm sorry. I had read it years ago, and I definitely remember it being a bit more exciting. I think I might actually have to cut that entire bit out from the VOD, just because I definitely think, it's annoying because I definitely remember enjoying the whole perspective shift aspect of it, but fair enough, I suppose. In which case, I am just going to go to something else that I had in mind, and that I'm just going to read to you directly, and I'm just going to do, because we actually have read a couple of Martindale's stories already, and those were actually, somewhat interesting, somewhat, there was a lot of, even if there was not a lot of action, there was a lot of rhetoric that one could fire off, a lot of things one could wax lyrical about and stretch one's oratory muscles, as it were. But here it's just sort of a meandering sort of thing. So I'm sorry about that. So I'm just going to go to this in it. This being My Escape from Suicide by John Albert Cohn from his collection A Musical Reformation, which is really the only really notable story in the book, and it's definitely shorter than what we just went through, oddly enough. So, sorry. And let's actually just get on with this. My Escape from Suicide. Possibly the reader will remember that during the year 1887 there were many cases of suicide in San Francisco. Self-destruction has for more than 30 years been a frequent occurrence in California, owing probably to the rapidity of the transition period through which society has been passing in that state. But during the summer of 1887 there was what might as well be called an epidemic of suicide. There were unusual conditions attending the death of these many unfortunates. Usually the reason for self-destruction is not hard to trace. Either ill health, financial disaster, dissipation, insanity, unhappy domestic relations, or disappointment in love are responsible for such occurrences, but several cases happening during the year mentioned were wholly unaccountable. They were among people in good physical health, with good business prospects, happy in their home surroundings, and with every prospect of long and successful lives. Another strange circumstance, which did not at the time cause much comment, was that in nearly every case these people were in the habit of crossing daily upon the ferry boats running between San Francisco and Oakland. There was no special importance attached to this fact at the time, and I believe I am the first person to throw any light upon its significance. During that year I was in the employ of a publishing house in San Francisco. Like hundreds of other young men, I lived in Oakland, going back and forth morning and evening by the means of the ferry. One afternoon I left the office earlier than usual, intending to take the 6 o'clock boat. I was 5 seconds late. Stopping to buy an evening paper, I reached the wharf just in time to see the large doors close and to hear the boat move away from the landing. There was nothing for me to do but seat myself in the waiting room and take the next boat half an hour later. Glancing over the paper, the first headline which met my eye was this: "Another suicide. Young man takes his life this morning. No plausible reason can be given for the act." Then followed the details. While reading the account of a man sat down in the seat beside me, and although I did not glance up for several minutes, I felt that he was looking on my paper and reading the story with me. An uncomfortable feeling came over me, a vague, uncertain, unreasonable foreboding of impending trouble, and feeling that I could give no reason for, but which seemed probable by the physical influence of the man beside me. It was with a movement of impatience that I folded my paper and looked at my neighbour. He was a good-looking man, about 50 years of age, with a large, deep-set black eyes, black hair, and he was dressed in a manner which gave him the appearance of a clergyman. "May I take your paper a moment?" he said in May I take your paper a moment?" he said in a penetrating voice, as if he were accustomed to command and we obeyed. Glancing at it, he continued, "And still another man weary of life. Well, I only wonder that the world is not depopulated from suicide. The conditions of living in this part of the 19th century are of such a character that it is hardly worthwhile to struggle against the current. To most of us, life is really not worth living, and were I a braver man, the papers of tomorrow would tell of my death and add one more to the list of self-murderers." You approve of suicide?" I remarked. "To me it seems only a form of cowardice, inexcusable under any circumstances." "Cowardly, not at all," replied my new acquaintance. "It is far from cowardice. A coward would never take his own life. It requires bravery. I have thought much upon the subject, and with your permission, I will tell you just how the matter appears to me, and what conclusion I have reached." I did not like the man, but I had nearly half an hour to wait, and beside, there was something of novelty about hearing a man talk who had thought seriously of taking his own life. So I signified my willingness to listen. It is impossible for me now to recall all that he said, but I remember that I soon became intensely interested in the man and in his story. The feeling of repulsion which I had at first experienced left me, and I seemed fascinated by his personality. He talked of the troubles, disappointments, struggles, and perplexities of human life, of the uselessness of endeavour, of the certainty that death is a dreamless sleep, of the futility of what men term success, and of the emptiness of fate. His voice, which at first seemed hard and unattractive, soon assumed a low, almost confidential tone, strangely soothing and sympathetic. As he talked, I experienced a peculiar feeling of restfulness and of confidence in the speaker. All the objections which I raised to his theories he met and disproved in so plausible a way that his arguments completely satisfied me. The half-hour soon passed, and when it was time to go about the boat, I had no disposition to leave my interesting companion. We took seats together in the cabin, and during our conversation he handed me his card, upon which I read the name Dr. George Kurtz. As I recall now the different portions of my strange experience with this man, I remember... Sorry, now I have to wait for the page to load. I'm just going to have to restart that. Sorry. There we go, hopefully. Come on. There we go. So, yes. I remember that he... Oh, they doubled the pages there. That he frequently looked directly at me, and that my gaze met his. I thought his eyes wonderfully expressive and their expression kind and sincere. On the opposite side of the cabin, directly in front of us, sat a young man of about my own age, who seemed quite well acquainted with the doctor, for they had cordially greeted each other upon meeting as we were getting on board. When about halfway to Oakland, I noticed that the doctor was looking intently at the young man, and that the latter was becoming noticeably uneasy. He soon started from his seat, walked quickly toward one of the doors, turned again and again took his seat. He repeated this twice. My new acquaintance had ceased talking with me. Indeed, he seemed for a time wholly unconscious of my presence. The young man now became deathly pale. His hands were clasped together, and his whole appearance indicated extreme distress. Suddenly, as if forming a plan which he determined to execute at once, he sprang from his seat and hurried on to the side of the boat. The doctor and I quickly followed. Reaching the rail, he paused an instant, turned and glanced at the doctor, uttered a piercing cry, and leaped into the water. There was the usual commotion and the usual means for rescue employed, but they were unsuccessful. The body was not recovered until the next day. Well, said the doctor, turning to me as the boat started off on its way, I believe he is better off. You knew him, did you not? I asked. Slightly. I became acquainted with him a few days ago while waiting for the ferry boat in San Francisco. He was a bright young fellow, and the burden of living became too heavy. When we reached Oakland, the doctor expressed a wish that he might meet me again, and we separated. Somehow I could not get the question of suicide out of my mind, and that night after going to bed I went over my conversation with the doctor. How plausible his arguments seemed. I began to think of my own disappointments, of my failure to attain what I had attempted, of the faithlessness of friends and of the success of enemies. Before this time I had been decidedly optimistic in disposition and in my judgments of the world, but now the dark side of human existence became painfully apparent. Life seemed so great a burden that I began to wish myself free from it. Then I commenced to speculate upon the various means which one might employ for self-destruction, to consider the comparative advantages of each, and to try to determine which I would use should I decide to end my existence. I remembered that drowning was generally supposed to be an easy way of meeting death, that the sensations as described by those who had been resuscitated after they were apparently dead were not of a painful character. But I had a horror of drowning, and feel that, as desperate as I might become, I could never bring myself to the point of leaping into the water. Shooting was, if anything, still more abhorrent, while the thought of the lingering pain which usually accompanies the use of many poisons fairly made me shudder. There were, however, two methods which I regarded in a more favourable light. One of these was the use of some anaesthetic, and the other was to sever a blood vessel and bleed to death. Either of these methods would, I thought, be practically painless, and I decided that, should occasion require me to make a choice, I would select one of these. That night I slept but little, and my feverish slumber was made horrible by such dreams as might haunt a man upon the eve of execution. The following day I performed my work in a dazed, mechanical sort of way, and when night came I hurried to the ferry landing, hoping to meet my acquaintance of the evening before. He was there. He greeted me cordially, shaking my hand, and as I now remember, holding it an unnecessary length of time. At once we began to talk of suicide, and I told him of my conclusion formed the previous night. He at once agreed with me and added, "It is a remarkable coincidence that we should both reach the same conclusion at the same time, only," he continued, "I went a step beyond you. Last evening I decided that tonight at midnight I would cut the radial artery of my left arm, and in that way relieve myself of further trouble and disappointment." He made the announcement as coolly and deliberately as though it were a matter of little moment, and it did not seem to startle or even surprise me in the slightest degree. Taking my hand again and looking directly and steadily into my eyes, he said, "Goodbye, I shall never see you again. If you are wise, you will do as I shall do tonight. Good night. Think of what I have told you." Slowly I turned away and went to my boarding place. For the first time I realized that I was in the power of this man, that whatever he willed me to do I should do. Yet the knowledge brought no uneasiness to me. On the contrary, I was perfectly willing it should be so, for strange as it may appear, I seemed to have perfect confidence in the man, and believed that his influence over me was for the best. When I reached my room, it appeared cold and uninviting, and I experienced such feeling of depression as I had never felt before. What if I too, I thought, should take my life at midnight? Who would care very much? Why not end the weariness of existence, the treadmill of monotonous daily tasks? Then I began to consider what preparations would be necessary should I commit such an act, and it all seemed surprisingly easy. It would do no harm at least to make these arrangements, and any action would to some extent relieve the horrible weight of gloom which oppressed me. I must do something. Seating myself at my desk, I first wrote a note to my employers, in which I gave them some necessary information regarding certain business transactions during the day and some directions about settling my affairs. Then I prepared a note for my landlady, telling her about the disposition of my effects according to my wishes, and making proper arrangements about financial matters. Then came the letter home to my people in Maine. As I recall the matter now, this seemed the most unaccountable part of my strange experience. Although I am naturally extremely fond of home and friends, I seem then to have lost suddenly all natural affection for the members of my family, and I wrote a most matter-of-fact letter to my father and mother, simply telling them that I was tired of living and bidding them a cool goodbye. The sorrow, the trouble, and the shame which I should bring upon them by taking my own life did not apparently move me for a moment, or indeed even occur to me. After completing these letters, I glanced at my watch. It was precisely 11 o'clock. The writing was finished, and, rising from my desk, I began walking back and forth in the room, while the terrible sense of loneliness and gloom seemed heavier than ever before. Why, I thought, should I not at once take advantage of my preparations? It would never be so easy again, and surely the future offered nothing for which it would be worth while to prolong the struggle. I walked to a dressing table, opened a drawer, and took from it a razor. I touched its blade with my thumb. Its edge was so keen. One quick, firm slash across the wrist, which would cause but a moment's pain, and the rest would be easy. I would do it. Instantly upon making this resolve, I experienced a sense of relief, and I went about the details of the final arrangement with as much confidence and coolness as though dressing for an evening's entertainment. I quietly put the room to rights, sealed and directed my letters, placed several books in their places in the bookcase, and folded and put away some articles of clothing which had been returned that day from the laundry. Then I turned some water into the washbowl, removing my coat, and rolled up the shirt sleeve upon my left arm. Calmly looking at my watch again, I saw that it lacked 5 minutes of 12. I would wait 5 minutes, I thought, and, as the doctor suggested, end my life at midnight. I touched the razor blade to the flesh. A few drops of blood appeared on my wrist, and I remembered the feeling of surprise that it hurt so little. Then a clock in a neighbouring church steeple began to slowly count off its 12 strokes. Just as the sound of the last stroke ceased, I extended my arm over the bowl, grasped the razor firmly, and nerved myself for the final act. Suddenly I felt a reaction, a relaxing of the muscles, a sensation of coldness in hands and feet, and before my blade reached my wrist it dropped from my hand. For a moment I stood trembling, shivering with cold perspiration starting from every pore. The shock that I experienced was such as comes to a man rescued from an unseen death. The tension upon my nerves was much more than I could bear, and I sank to the floor. Grey dawn was just taking the place of darkness when I regained consciousness, and it was several minutes before I could collect my confused thoughts sufficiently to recall what I had passed through. Oh, the horror of it when I began to realize my escape! It was like a dreadful nightmare, but there upon the floor was the razor. Upon my wrist was the slight cut made by its sharp blade, and there upon the desk were the letters which I had so coolly prepared. All these formed ample proof that it had been a reality and not a dream. That day I was too weak to go to the office, but late in the afternoon I went out upon the street, hoping that the fresh air might benefit me. At once I was startled by this cry from a newsboy, "Here's your evening bulletin, all about the latest suicide." I bought a paper, and upon the first page were these headlines: "Still another suicide. Dr. Kurtz of this city takes his own life at midnight. At one time a professional hypnotist. Lately his friends had regarded him as mildly insane. Severs an artery and bleeds to death." It is not necessary for me to offer any further explanation. I had been under the influence of this man, and his death had saved my life. Moreover, there was no longer an epidemic of suicide in San Francisco. You will say, of course, that this story is wildly improbable. It is, but I have given you the facts. You may form your own conclusion. So that was that one. It's not amazing, but I definitely enjoy the potential, the potential of it. Though I believe a different writer, a more experienced writer than Cohn, could have taken the idea and expanded it and made it a little more, gave it a little bit more flesh, as it were. This seems to take the base idea, but sort of present it in as perfunctory of a manner as possible. Just sort of the base idea and not much else beside it. But it's an interesting thing to bring to people's attention nonetheless. So then I believe we can try something else that I actually had thought of, and that is Harris Merton Lyon's Sardonyx, specifically a few of the stories from this particular collection. And let me just find the particular section where that was. Did I actually cope with the sequel? Here it is. Sorry. I have it now. Let us go to... So we'll have In the Black and Tan, The Dog, and potentially, Into the Fourth Dimension. Definitely want to read that. And there was one other one in here that I actually did want to see here. Oh yes, I believe The Empty Scope. I have to open this one twice because I want to actually make note of the individual pages. So let's see. I will go to page 51 of Sardonyx. Let me just there we go. A couple more extra pages to go through. There we go. I'm not going to. There we go. In the Black and Tan. And that's a bit too big. And let the canakin clink, clink, and let the canakin clink. Iago's song. Business was brisk and going full tilt in Yellow Mammy's that night. The upper air of the bar room was clogged with rank tobacco smoke. Next, beneath it was a layer of tolerably clean breathing space, while the floor itself was a litter of clutter of sawdust, smoke spittoons, tables, whiskey, reek, and sodden humanity. Voices bawled for drinks and more drinks. Someone thumped the table in a foggy socialistic argument. The garish women who sat here and there among the crowd tittered and giggled and painted love. Yellow Mammy herself, a lithe, svelte, sinuous mulatto woman of extraordinary beauty, passed here and there among her guests, nodding, smiling, stopping to speak, barring to the befuddled gazers a glimpse of her morbid olive shoulder blades, dazzling them with a sudden sweep of her bediamonded fingers, luring them with the undulant motions of her hips. Whites and blacks and white blacks sat together in the most intimate confusion. Men from every walk of life, from every part of the great million-man city, men with every degree of desire. The waiters bustled to and fro with sloppy trays and with sloppier towels over their arms. The chink of money and the sound of curses intermingled in the rancid atmosphere. You see, I paused there for a second because I thought that the word chink there was not used to refer to an onomatopoeia, but to something decidedly different. Thankfully, I was wrong about that. So let's continue. From afar off, over in a corner where a slim, lanky, yellow... I'm not going to say that. That is a word that you probably expect in this sort of a work of this age, with this sort of environment. It starts with an N, and I'm not going to continue beyond that as far as spelling it. So a lanky yellow sat with his chair against the wall and plunked away at his banjo. Came the high, melodious, nasal words of a song. Have you seen my Henry? Again, I'm not going to even try and do this accent. I'm reading it as it is, completely without even attempting. I'm not going to, if I get it right, I could look like an asshole. And if I get it wrong, I could also look like an asshole. So I'm just going to read it as it is on the page. Well, no, I haven't seen, your man. Have you seen, my Henry? He's the finest in this land. Again, I'm sorry. I normally try to give a little bit of a oomph to these, but yeah, I am not going there. So, 2 slugs of booze and a cocktail for the girl, roared a hoarse, guttural voice at one of them drinking tables. And with that, I clips him on the broad basket, and he takes the count, said a burly young longshoreman to his pals, describing an amateur pugilistic bout of the night before. There was a guffaw at the words. The song went on through it all, accompanied by the twanging strings and yeah, I kind of. It's not that the song itself says any particularly nasty things per se, but I don't think you want to hear me say basically spell the same stuff. It's basically just, have you seen my Henry? And then it ends with, why, there's my loving Henry now. Not really much to miss, so I'm sorry. The bishop set his glass of squirrel booze down on the table, wiped his mouth with the stub of his right thumb. The same had been bitten off in a brawl some years before on that very spot, picked up his mittens and whip, and passed out into the cold night. Where do these cabbies all come from? I asked, jerking my head in the direction of the departing bishop. The reason they called him the bishop was that he looked like one of his long coat stiff looked like one in his long coat, stiff collar, and empty, fat and amply. Sorry, again. The reason they called him the bishop was that he looked like one in his long coat, stiff collar, and amply fattened face, and because of his rather phlegmatic and majestic demeanour. They're hoodlums, said the bartender viciously. All of the hoodlums, bums, rotten thugs. Oh, add a gutter. And the bishop? Oh, God, he said deprecatingly as he raised his hand and eyes to the ceiling. Oh, God, that bishop. The cold wind is a very penetrating, said the bishop outside to a hanger-on. As he spoke, he buried the stub of his thumb in one of his mittens. The bishop's voice was a high, flute-like toot, such as generally comes out of a girthy man. It was an amiable, soothing, easy voice. His eye was the passive, unintelligible, mild grey eye of a fish. It was almost the eye of a blind man, a dim, unwinking, watery orb, which gave no idea of what was going on in its owner's mind. His lean, scrawny nag under a cheap blanket stood behind him, stiff and sore, and pathetically bending against the cold. But the bishop was wrapped comfortably in a fine, long, thick coat, studded with brass buttons down the front, and he stood unmindful of the raucous weather, looming up behind his great bulging pouch, as impregnable and impassive as a sphinx. Yep, he repeated mildly, the wind is very penetrating. It was a fine large word unknown to many of his associates, and the bishop made a conversational pet of it. The wind howled, roared, guttural. The night whirled in gusts about the rickety gas lamps and beat the last vestige of cheer and friendliness out of the scene. Up and down the street all was a black, dismal desolation. It was a time of mystery and uncanny things. Inside the yellow lights flared and the banjo rattled, glass clicked, shouts were heard, and outside stood the bishop with his nag and his cab awaiting a fare. Like a fat leech he stood, peering sharply to the east and to the west, grimly, stolidly attendant upon any business that might come his way. For 15 minutes nothing moved except the icy wind and the horse's blanket. Then all at once something happened. Some 30 feet distant, a door opened briefly. A drunken form slid down, and a flight of steps fell with a soft, plump flat upon the sidewalk, and then slowly arose and fastened itself to a lamppost. "Hey!" grunted the voice beneath the street lamp unsteadily. For one swift moment the near eye of the bishop lighted with a horrid avarice. The form steadied itself. After a pause again came the voice. "Ain't that a cab, eh? Wash? Cab, here. Confound it, I say, cab." All the call of business, of course. The bishop briskly At the call of business, of course, the bishop briskly whipped his horse up to the spot. He lumbered down to help his fare into the ramshackle hack, and as he did so, he did not fail to take in the gleam of a diamond in the man's necktie, and two more on his fingers. It was a gentleman, evidently, clad in a fur overcoat and finely tailored clothes, and grasping a gold-headed cane, who lurched into the cab. An ample, well-built, ruddy-looking man with a heavy blond moustache. A rich Westerner, surmised the bishop, certainly not a New Yorker. Where to? He asked of his fare, affably, inclining an ear so that he might make the better acquaintance of the diamonds. He received an answer which sounded like Egutel. Very well, any good hotel. Stranger, yes, stranger here, sir, inquired the bishop innocently. The fare showed signs of sobbing, as if his main grievance had been touched, and he murmured, perfect stranger, alone, sizzy, without friend. Too bad, sir, assented the driver, noncommittently. He slammed the door, climbed aloft, wrapped himself in his lap robe, and clucked appealingly to his old plug. For some mysterious reason, that patient animal found his head turned uptown away from the usual hotel district, and at once he prepared for a long trip. The night grew thicker. The cold came from the air drifts miles overhead, caught by the nearing crests of the skyscrapers and hurled into the narrow streets below. With its chill breath, the wind buffeted the city from each one of the four quarters whimsically. The nag plodded on at its dreary professional gait, block after block without cessation, while the grey eyes of the driver, sitting aloft, stared at the gloomy waste in black cogitation. The bishop was thinking. The chance of a roll of bills was likely too, if they hadn't trimmed him in the house back there before they threw him out. The silent pilgrims were getting out into the wealthy residential section, where now a big house jogged by them grotesquely in the gloom, now a long stretch of quiet, windswept lawn slipped past. Of all the nights in the calendar, it was the roughest, wherefore they had passed no policeman for some time. The bishop chuckled neatly to himself with some warmth of design, and while he chuckled, his fare inside gabbled brokenly and snored. At last, with a gesture which was almost languid, the bishop turned and shouted down through the trap, "It's a bad night." There was a startling into consciousness below amid the cushions. "That's right," said the passenger sleepily. "The wind is very penetrating. That's what." The bishop looked up and down the road and smiled pleasantly. The horse suddenly stopped. "I'll get inside with you," volunteered the cabman softly. "It's warmer." Wherewith he wrapped the reins around the whip, climbed down, and entered. The door slammed shut, and of its own accord the old horse started again. On it went driverless, through the gusts and the blackness, clickety-click, clickety-click, its spared hocks dancing ahead grotesquely like the thighs of a skeleton, right and left, up and down, right and left, up and down, clickety-click, clickety-click. If anything, the night hovered closer about the antiquated beast and the rickety rag, and the silence was thicker inside where the fair road and the bishop sat, getting warm. If the clattering steed had looked around, perhaps it would have wondered why its master was not on the seat, why the reins were wrapped around the whipstock, and why the curtains in the back had been pulled down. But it jogged on, while the wind blew across its bit and brought the water to its eyes, and while back of its wagon rolled and bumped curtained mystery, heavy, lumpish, sullen. Then the horse pricked up an ear swiftly. There had been a sudden grunt and a scuffle. It sounded for all the world as if a hog had been cornered in a barnyard. Then more grunting, and the bishop's voice slightly strained intoned. "Ah, you would you?" He was followed by silence, then a snarl, then silence, then a movement followed by something not exactly silence. All this time the fare had not spoken, or if he had, something had stopped his throat. 15 seconds later the horse came to a halt, obedient to a muffled command. The bishop jumped out, slamming the door briskly. About him the night threw its hovering black wing, while he peered ahead and behind carefully. Satisfied, he chuckled softly, wiped the stub of his right thumb in an odd manner on a bit of newspaper, threw the thing aside disdainfully, and said to his nag banteringly as he climbed aboard, "Go on, you. Git now. Stand there all night, eh?" With the whistle of his whip, they doubled back and looped gaily into the city, the night rushing down the country road at their heels like an avenging assassin. Again the wind caroled and raved, prying up the lap robe, twisting the horse's tail, and with a menacing movement flapping the still-drawn curtains. The bishop jerked his head as he noted this last fact. "Stupid!" He drew up, descended, and raised the window covering, saying in his teeth as he did so, "Tut-tut-tut." It was as if the hand of the porter had shaken and bungled its job. He brought the curtains up with a snap. Then with a grim chuckle he leaned in and said, "D'ye say any good hotel?" "A hotel," he mimicked. "Eh? All right. You don't care to answer me, eh?" Again the bishop's sardonic laugh. "A hotel." "Well, I be damned." With which prophecy concerning his own future the bishop returned to his seat, and the jaded nag took up its interminable clickety-click, while inside there rolled and joggled gruesomely from side to side the thing which had but a short while before called itself a human being. All the thicker the ebony night beat outside like a stormy sea. A creeping sense of horror seemed to fill the lonely air. But above it all, in rare good humour, sat the serene pilot, steering his way through the haze of electric lights which marked the fashionable hotel district. The bellboys were dozing, the clerk reading a novel, the porter standing outside the big hotel in a snug corner, when, through the eddying wind, a mean, shabby hag drove up. The driver climbed briskly down for all his ponderous weight and threw open the cab door in a business-like manner. "Hotel, sir," he said, speaking gently into the interior. The porter came forward. "Here's your hotel, sir," said the cabby impatiently, thrusting his head inside the door. Hold on, I'm just checking a chat. Okay. Now I lost my place for a second. Where did I leave off? I did that. I'm not going to read more of it, so I can close this. Yes, here we go. The stub of a thumb trembled against the panelling as the bishop turned and whispered hoarsely in the porter's ear, "Lord Guy's dead. Dead. A stranger." There was a general running to and fro, a calling of the house detective, a physician, a policeman. There was a taking of the cabman's name, a hearing of the cabman's story. This fare had been picked up in front of a Black and Tan on West 27th Street. Sure he knew the place. That there was his stand. Fare looked like he was a bit groggy and in his cups like, but Kebby supposed that such was the case and paid no special attention. He must have been stabbed back of the ear even then, and that's what made him a stagger so. Fare had climbed in, said he was a stranger and wanted to be taken to any good hotel, and had then slammed the door. Kebby had brought the Fare direct ear. Selp him guard, that was all. The detectives noted that the dead man had been robbed, but there were no signs of a struggle in the cab. It had been a neat job. "Well, we'll have him up," said the policeman, "but there's no sure of getting him, even if it was him. You can't get nothing out of that gas house gang." The next night in the Black and Tan, the bustle of business went on as before. If anything, it was merrier. Yellow Mammy passed among her guests with her same lissomeness, smiling more than ever, for on her finger glistened a newcomer among her diamonds. The bishop had made himself solid. Over the corner was whining the same old song. The bishop, sitting quietly by himself, called out amiably, "Give us something new." The way he said it made the mulatto singer look at him keenly. In a moment the man came over to him and was volubly begging him to buy a drink. "Buy a drink, boss, buy a drink. I knows you got the money to pay for it," said the musician. The bishop rose to his feet impressively, the stump of his thumb beating the table to emphasize his words. "I certainly have. Boy," he called to the bartender, "give 'em all drink on me." He looked at Yellow Mammy. She nodded acquiescence to the doubtful bartender, and the drinks were served. Then, while the rabble drank their booze and shouted their hoarse praise of the giver, the bishop leaned forward and chuckled into his whiskey. I hope he's in a good hotel now. The dog. Sorry. Checking the chat again. Okay, let me just find it. I'm just checking to see where I'm at now. So let's see the dog. It's a bit shorter, methinks. Now, do I read this or do I switch directly to what I was interested in before, i.e. the Admiral's Chair? Well, I could switch back later, but yeah, sure. Okay, now we're going to read the other thing that I was actually intending to read before, and that was the Admiral's Chair. Actually, a couple of the ones. I believe we have 4 short stories that are part of the sort of connected sequence in the first part of this particular collection. So let me just see if we can get through all those. I'm just going to go full screen and make the text a bit larger. Okay. So, to start off with the Admiral's Chair. The great ramshackle sea-coast inn was full of animation on that September evening. It had been a great day since the sea monster, the giant German submarine which had for weeks haunted the bay and had preyed upon the fishing boats and other helpless craft, had been slain and lay full of dead pirates in the shallows by the point. The long inn parlour was crowded with excited but very happy fishermen, and the tale of the pirate's end was told again and again, from endless points of view in vernacular soft as it was triumphant, told and retold till at last there was nothing more to tell, and that silence which angels break fell upon the fisherfolk. And the angel on this occasion proved to be the innkeeper, a short sturdy man out of Devon, with a little peaked beard, reddish brown, touched with grey, and round, bright blue eyes. A strange-looking man he was, a man who might have come straight off the Golden Hind on which his ancestors sailed round the world, a man known for his fearlessness, his fierceness in moments of action, his invariable softness of speech. He was, in a sense, in these times merely a nominal landlord. As a man of action, there was much for him to do in such times on such a coast, and his fishing boat bore other things than fish to land. But the part that he played, and his wonderful fashion of playing it, for the nonce are hidden away, though his diary, for he is a methodical man, this descendant of the shipmate of Francis Drake, will make no mean footnote to the records of war. Meantime, there he was, a sailorman among sailormen, sitting in his great chair at the head of a long trestle table, and looking from time to time out of the broad window into the quiet bay, and at the far-off moonlit point where the dead sea monsters sucked in the sands of the raggedy tides. The rough trestle table was certainly out of keeping with the magnificent carved chair set on a little platform in which he sat. Though its splendours were faded and the embossed furnishings worn and stained, yet time had, if anything, added dignity to the chair. The gold still lay in the patterned Spanish leather, save in the curved armrests that end in crowned eagles' heads. The chair, if looked at by a curious eye, gave a sense of regality, and it was evidently built for a man great in thews as well as birth. The depths of the chair, as well as the incurred back surrounding the purple cushion, showed that. Above the back was faded but splendid blazoning of arms, with a legend below and an eagle crest above the arms. The nature of the wood puzzled the experts. It was hard and heavy as iron, with something of the tint of mahogany, but lighter as the grain of the great curved legs ending in huge bird claws showed. The landlord sat in his chair, one arm resting on the side, the hand playing with his beard as he looked out to the point with wide, dreamy eyes. The sailormen sat drinking their beer below him and smoking much tobacco in great content. Their chief, for so they regarded him, was watching the dead foe, that they knew and were content to smoke in silence. Then he said in a far-off sort of way, "This chair I am sitting in was my father's chair, grandfather's chair. A steersman at Aboukir Bay, his father's chair, the man who sailed with Hood. It goes back, how far does it go back, John Lyon?" "It goes back," said the white-bearded sailor, to the flight against the Dutch, the day of fine, clean, bloody fighting, to the fight against the Dutch. Yes, said James Port, the landlord, that is true, but it goes back further than that. Do none of you know the history of this chair? Yes, William, it does go back to the days of old Queen Bess and further, but the history of it? Come, some of you old fellows know and can't say. Let me tell it over again. And he called for candle lights on the long table, and spoke from the shadows of the chair, while the rays of the rising moon struck along the table and showed him as he sat, half showered, half hid with the elusive light. As he spoke, he seemed like one speaking out of the far-off age of desperate battles that he was recalling, and his audience, with their bearded faces turning towards him in the candlelight, looked as if they too had come up from the age of the Armada, and as if this were some great stately cabin of a mighty galleon, a treasure ship homeward bound from the Spanish Main. Such were the illusions of the mingled light and the great Spanish chair of state. The man who won this chair, the Admirals Chair, was James Port. Same as I am, James Port. Hold up a candle to the picture at the back of me, William, up there by the rafters. Two of the younger men took candles and stood behind the landlord and showed the picture. There sat a man in this veritable chair, a Spanish grandee bearing the insignia of his rank as admiral, a mighty man whose ringed right hand crossed his body and clasped a sword hilt. The pale face with the tiny beard and moustache was what struck the company. The eyes were closed. It was a dead man who sat hand on hilt in the great chair. A wonderful painter must have limned that picture, for one expected the dead man to open his eyes, to draw his rapier. That, said James Port, that is how he came ashore, bobbing in the waves. We buried him in the old church, the Admiral of the Chair. He came ashore at the point, bobbing in the waves, just where the U-boat lies. Look at the picture. Do you see? He is tied in the chair. The rope is now in the drawer under the chair, the rope and 50 pieces of 8. Here, bring out the drawer, William, and he handed the man a curiously worked short key. Then he leant back, and the sailorman looked first at the Admiral in the chair above, then at James Port in the chair beneath. And one of them thought that the Admiral's eyes opened, and he drew his sword a little pace. Then the men came down from the stools that they had stood on, and all crowded around James Port to look at the drawer with its long silken rope and dozens of corroded gold pieces, and a little miniature, perhaps from the Spanish Netherlands, possibly from the brush of the young Holbein, of a young Spanish beauty. His wife, said James Port. I knew her well. You? Well, James Port. Let me tell you my story as though I were that James Port. We do not know what heat is here in our England, that is, home dwellers. But we all, I think, shipmates, we all here have been on the line and in the swelters of the Spanish Main. 'Twas in September of 1580, was it, that I first saw the Admiral? It had been a wild year. Many of us English had been privateering down in the Main, harrying the ships of the Spanish king. Most were sailing under English captains, but I had drifted away and joined what was neither more nor less, to be frank, shipmates, than a pirate fleet, manned with desperadoes, half-castes of every land under heaven. Our admiral, the king of our little island, where we lay perdus, and shared and buried treasure, and refitted and drank like water the rarest wines of France and Spain, and gambled our wealth. A bit of it is in that drawer there. Our admiral was, of all nationalities conceivable, a Spaniard, a great man under a shadow, banished for a heretic marriage by the Inquisition from Madrid. Enemy though he was, few braver seamen, I say, sailed the seas. An explorer, a man of thought and knowledge, a man of infinite humour and tenderness, of iron will and fierce determination. When he fled out the Vigo, the loveliest harbour of the west, his wife went with him, and they sped southwest in the largest, swiftest corsair that the yards of Tunis ever built. He had picked his crew, and no such pirate crew ever before sailed the seas. His fame grew, though who he was no man knew. His fame grew, but soon a fleet was under his command, and he took tribute from his cousin, the King of Spain. The English he avoided. Ferox fights not with Ferox, but such was his fame that some of us drifted into his command, and rightly so, for was not his sword against the Spanish power? Look at him again. He was a king among men. Once more the candles were held up against the portrait in the rafters, and the wonderful pale face with the mighty brow shone out. Surely his eyes were open now. Surely the rapier was loosening from the hilt. Surely a smile was breaking over that inscrutable face. I knew, went on James Port, sitting easily in the Admiral's chair, I knew the trade routes and the seaways in and out the islands as few men know them, and so the Admiral sent for me. He always picked his men. I saw him first sitting in this very chair in the great cabin on a September evening. And the Duchess sat by him, a flower among the flowers she had gathered that day to grace his adventure. Easily in English he spoke and praised our people, spoke of Grenville as a brother, of Drake as a master. If I had but Drake and Hawkins under my command, we would conquer Spain and make the two great sea people kin. Is it possible? They only serve the Queen, I said, but you are serving me. Only so long as you are serving the Queen. Nay, I am serving Spain, the real Spain, he said with a smile, and turning to the Catalonian beside him, added in Spanish with a tenderness belonging rather to the soul than to words, this is the only Queen I serve. And so we set to work at the charts, and soon I found that he was my master in this as in all else. Thus the Admiral shared with the English the abundant treasures of the Spanish main, and in many a stern sea fight I fought behind him, his bodyguard, though perhaps he knew it not, as he led the desperate boarding parties that swept the galleons of Spain. Once he met Hawkins. It was in this fashion. A galleon out of the port of Spain lay becalmed on a breathless moonlit night. We sighted her, and our boats were out with muffled oars, creeping toward the prey. Suddenly we heard the splash of unmuffled oars and realized that an English boarding party was swooping in the night. It was a race for the richest treasure galleon of the year. Both parties boarded at the same moment, and the Spanish troops, smitten at once on both sides, surrendered after a brief bloody struggle. A pile of dead men lay between the Admiral's men and Hawkins's men. The Admiral leapt across the barrier, rapier in hand, and saluted the English captain in the moonlight. Is it peace, he said, or shall we fight it out, Captain Hawkins? Hawkins cautiously stroked his beard and said, and then wiping his bloody sword on his left hand, said, if we fight we lose all, for the King of Spain's men are many. We shall share alike. Nay, since you grant that I grant all, said the Spaniard with a lofty condescension. I claim nothing save one grasp of the hand of a great sailor, but we shall meet one day again, and he withdrew his men and left the ship to the Englishman. But the Englishman, not to be outdone, took from his neck a gem that would have made a king's ransom. Give this to one whom you love, he said, and the Duchess wore it till her death. It shines still in the little picture. When the Duchess died, a change came over the Admiral. He did not weep for her, but death was his bourne, for sorrowfully he needed to meet her again. He dispersed his fleet, buried his treasure by the secret spot where the ashes of his only treasure lay, and set out for Europe to offer the King of Spain his sword. James Port, he said to me, no man ever had more faithful servant than you have been, but here we part. From tomorrow we are enemies. But two things I give you, if fortune and time permit. One is my chair, which after these present wars I will assent to you, and the other is this chart of my treasures on a certain headland watching in that the east from Florida. These I shall never need, since my treasure is in heaven. The chair you shall have, and I foresee that the treasure will come to some seed of thine. And with the chart he gave me a ring that the Duchess had worn, for, said he, you served her well. So we parted. It was the spring of 1588, and forgiven or unforgiven by the Inquisition. He placed his ship at the disposal of the king, and captain of the old Barbary corsair, but no longer with his faithful crew, he joined the Armada. The Inquisition never forgives. The Church of Rome in Spain has a long memory. And so it happened that I saw him once again. In a sense he met Hawkins too, but never crossed swords with him. The Inquisition did its work in sight of the Spanish king's enemies. Its men seized the finest sailor, the best commander in Medina's fleet, and binding him into his royal chair with a silken rope, hurled him with it into the Channel tides. The Inquisition sheds no blood, and the dead man drifted ashore, bobbing in the tides at yonder point, while Hawkinson's guns were riddling the dead man's ship. I hear them now. And Jamesport gazed dreamily out to the point where he had seen the Admiral come drifting in, the point where the Admiral's ship was wrecked, the point where the German sea monster lay choking in the shifting sands. I hear them now. As he spoke, the moonlight breaking through a scudding cloud fell full on the Admiral's face, and the eyes were open and flashing, the mouth seemed to be speaking sudden crisp orders that appear was half from its sheath. And Jamesport said for the third time, I hear them now. Even as he finished, the sound of guns at sea came booming in through the quiet September night, and flash after flash cut through the horizon like lightning. Men, the lifeboats! Men! Cried Jamesport, leaping from his chair. The only game's afoot, and like unleashed hounds of war, the company, a moment ago listening like children, took the gleaming great sea road. The moonlight faded from the picture, but the great chair, dimly lighted by the last candle, was not empty. A man sat there, sat as if it were his wont. His head was resting on his left intern hand. His eyes were watching the point and the flashing of the guns. By him, leaning on the opposite chair arm to that on which his arm rested, was a woman who gazed, not at the point, but at the rapt, wonderful face of the Admiral of the chair. The real Spain was awakening, the old Spain of chivalry that smote the heathen and the Hun, the Spain of which Cervantes dreamed. And the woman that flowered among the flowers laid her hand upon his, she who was his treasure as the last earthly candle faded away. Now, we shall go on to the second story then, but I will need to very quickly just head off to the bathroom. I will be right back. Okay. All right, I'm back. Okay, so I definitely feel there's been a bit of an upturn in the quality of these. Some of these selections I made ages ago, so I forgot certain details of them. But yes. Now I remember these actually being quite good, so we'll do these. Hopefully for the rest of the sequence, and then while I'm going to turn this off, I just want to make a little bit more of sorry. Now let me just go and make a little bit of I believe there was a good one for in the Brusov election that we can look at. If I remember correctly, I will just which we can read after going through several of these. I'm just making a bit of an inquiry as to that. No. Yes, that is. Oh, that was a long one. You could definitely try this one. What is that? I'm just going to see if I find any notes of. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at this. I would have to look it over later on. I know there was one. Okay, I definitely found some record of it. Hold on a little, just a second. Oh, interesting. If I go through, sorry, I'm just checking to see. There we go. So we could definitely try and read the last two stories from that collection because I've. But this is a different one now. Let's actually go and continue with reading of the Admiral's Chair. Specifically, we still have 3 more stories in the sequence to go. So, so we have the Caverns of Eleuthera. It was a fierce October evening, and the lifeboat had, after a desperate journey, successfully answered the flares of a fishing smack broken on that wild rocky coast. The crew, one and all, were saved, and there was no other ships from that little port at any rate fighting for life. So after the great, deep-bellied lifeboat had been run ashore, hauled up the beach, and with infinite labour of straining tackle comfortably put to bed amid the angry shoutings of the gale and the visitings of a scudding moon, James Port returned with a pleased mind to his inn, the Black Sea Dog. He slipped through the long inn parlour, where fishing folk were already gathering, and passing the Admiral's Chair, opened a little door, climbed an old winding oak staircase, and entered a long sitting-room above the inn parlour, panelled throughout, where his wife and daughters sat. But his 2 boys, 14 and 15, had been first with the news, and were already telling the tale of rescue with flashing eyes and excited gestures. James Port laughed at the lamplit scene, and, as he went off to change his dripping clothes, said, "I will show you how to tell a story after supper." "What story?" shouted the boys eagerly and together. "Pieces of 8, said the blue-eyed father, as he squeezed the wet out of his beard. "I will bring you down the iron box." "Such a story for boys," said his wife as her husband vanished. "And for girls too," she added as she and the girls rose, and all hands were piped for the pleasing task of getting ready a multitudinous supper of bacon and eggs, fried chips, and bread on this auspicious evening of roaring October, where the gale was flinging itself in vain against the old Elizabethan inn, and at the most drove white turf smoke curling round the panelled walls, as it had curled for 3 centuries and more. At At last the appetite of the Port family, silently exercised with a vigour worthy of the race, was appeased, and the work of clearing away was performed with celerity in view of the promised tale. But as the family settled round the fire, and James Port was unlocking a small iron box which he had placed on the round table, there was a feeble knocking at the door, hardly at first noticeable through the gusts of the gale. The sound startled the children, and even made placid Mrs. Port look up, and when the knock was repeated in a quavering fashion, James Port called out, "Come in!" The door slowly opened, and a very old white-bearded sailor peered in. "Come in, Nicholas Game," said the landlord heartily, but with a curious look as though a coincidence had happened. "Come in and join us." "I felt a call, Captain, to see ye this evening, the 13th October. Ye mind the date?" said the old sailor as he came upon the room, much as though it were the deck balancing himself as he walked and feeling out on either side. Sit thee there," said James Port imperatively. "Do I mind the date? Why, in the bustle of the war I had forgotten. But words of wonder it be the date. My word, Nicholas, the 13th of October, the day we saw it with these very eyes." "Saw what?" said the boys breathlessly, and the girls listened, chins on hands, with their feet, while their feet were roasting at the turf fire. "Your fortune, my fortune, our fortune, thousands and thousands of pieces of 8, and diamonds and rubies, and it." "Yes," quivered the old man, fumbling for his pipe. "It." And the wind roared and raved as he spoke the word. "I take it, Captain, that you be, in a manner of speaking, the richest man in the world." "Yes," said James Port, "I suppose I do. I suppose I be." "Oh, do tell us," cried the boys. "Let us open the iron chest first," said he, and the lock clicked and he turned back the heavy top. "Be the Admiral's chart there, Captain?" "It be, or it should be. Let us see. Here is Captain Hawkins's gem which the Duchess wore." Even as he spoke, the jewels blazed in the light of the lamp, the glory of the regalia of some Aztec queen. The old sailor shuffled toward the door and locked it, muttering the while in the bastard Spanish of the name. "And here are the 3 stories of the great search. How we used them, Nicholas, that year. Wonderful true they were," muttered the old man. "But where be the chart, I be come to ask?" And as he spoke, Nicholas Game seemed suddenly a sterner, younger man, with a keen outlook under his bushy brows. "It be thy trust." James Port did not reply, but searched busily among the various papers in the box. The chart was not there. "I have not opened the box since the war began, nor indeed thought of it, but the key has never left me. This is the 3rd loss since the black man brought it in 1588. What shall we do?" While speaking, he never showed the least tremor of vexation, though the loss was immeasurable. It was an emergency to be faced, an event in a great game. There must be another key. The chart may be gone for 4 years, and the treasure too. What do you think, Nicholas? "I know," said the old man grimly, "where the chart and the key were a week ago, out at sea. I know where they were at dawn today, on a dead body on this coast, washed up by the tide. I saw the body, searched the body, here they be. Keep better watch, Captain." And the old man put a little oilskin case of ancient shape and a rusty key on the table. James Port's eyes flashed. There was something more than chance in this. It was the hand of the Admiral, he thought, or of the Duchess, for he was not less superstitious than his kind, and perhaps with more cause. "What sort of a corpse were it, Nicholas?" he said, lighting his pipe and resting his elbow on the chart. "It were the black man again, the very man that these stories tell of, the man this inn be named after, the high-cheeked man with straight black hair. I dragged the body down to low water mark in the wind and storm at daybreak. We want no quests." "But father," broke in the elder boy, "he was a real man, can't be the man these old writings tell of. He were here the night you told the Admiral's Chair, the day the U-boat sank. He sat in the bar that evening and drank spirits. I know because he paid in bad foreign money that William took to English in the dusk. You kept the odd coin, mother." "So I did," said she. "Here it is." They all bent together in the lamplight, looking at the coin. It was a blanco of the days of Philip II. Nicholas and James Port looked at each other with knit brows. Well, anyway, he's dead, said Port, yet I wish he were buried. But the story you promised, father, said the younger boy, who did not connect the visitor with the story. And James Port laughed in his cheeriest way and said, Well, here it is, and taking the box on his knees began, with the boy sitting beside each leg and looking up at him, while old Nicholas sat in the group of mother and two daughters on the other side of the great open hearth. My stories come in jumps, boys, and I can't stop to say whether the man in the story is James Port who sailed with Drake, or James Port who fought the Dutch, or James Port who sailed with Hood, or this James Port who sits here. The only James Port who it isn't, as yet, is you, my boy. And he looked down on the sunny face on his left side. Well, scene number 1. James Port sitting in his new inn, which then they called the Rose, a week or two after the Armada fight. It were an autumn evening, and the drawer, man like William, he called me and said a black man wanted to see me, and so I went down and saw he. He were a strange-looking man, but I knew him in a minute. It was the Admiral's servant come ashore somehow from the wreck. He smiled when he saw me, and said in Spanish, or rather the lingo of the Spanish Main, this from his late Highness, and gave me this very iron box. I offered to reward him and feast him, but he coldly put aside my offers and said, It was my master's last order, I have done it. I have no master now. I fight for my own hand. Some day, somehow, I will have the chart. I turned away for a moment, thinking someone called, and when I looked again, he were gone and nowhere to go to. He were a ghost, I think, said the younger boy. He were the devil, I am certain, said old Nicholas. Here were a man right enough, I knew him, said James Port. Now I will read out the first written story, and he took out of the box a faded manuscript in a crabbed Elizabethan hand, which he was able, after years of handling and consultation, to read. It was brief and ran thus. This is the relation of the finding of the Admiral's treasure under the head hills of Eleuthera off the shores of Florida. For 7 years after the coming of the black man with a chart, I waited opportunity to find the way laid down to that secret place. In the year of our Lord, 1595, being in the 28th of August, I hoisted sail in the company of Admiral Drake, he being bound for Nombre de Dios in Portobello, where he died, rich in the great honour he had achieved, greatly bewailed by his own nation and country, and a star unto posterity. But I did part from him at Puerto Rico, having many fair words from him, who had been my admiral in other years, and speeding northwest, cast anchor in the horned bay of the haunted isle of Eleuthera on the eve of Christmas, 1595. The chart showed that this was the bay, and that in the south part of the bay, where the cliffs look northwest, the treasure lies. Our Indian pilot Topiawari brought our barge into a sandy beach, where a freshet of water runs from down rocks, and there we bade him wait while we climbed to come to the tops of the coral hills, where we supposed the search would end. From that height we saw faint lands south, west, and north, and beneath us the bay and our ship riding there, and round us was fair country, and singing birds and herons and cranes of many colours were standing in the stream. The chart bade us seek the great crane, and presently we sighted a rock of that shape, with bill plucking, as it were, fish from the earth. And beneath the crane on the chart were the figure 153, which were a fitting parable, and happily a God's providence did mislead the black man. James Port stopped. The manuscript was ended. The rest of the story had been told from father to son, but that will come next. Enough to say now that a pestilence struck the ship's company, and an unknown sickness whereby all strength was taken from them, marked by swollen legs, shrunk, blackened sinews, and aching teeth. Many died, and but 4 sound men brought the ship home. But James Port and Nicholas Game saw and handled the treasure that lies in the caverns of Eleuthera, and saw there too the crystal coffer where the Duchess sleeps, ever lit by some secret light from above, and ever sung by the sound of falling waters. The next search was told at the end of the days of the buccaneers in the Caribbean Sea, Here is something of the story of James Port, the most desperate of us all, who sailed with Morgan and was in the great fight at Panama in 1671. It is a fine story, but too long to read tonight, and the speaker laid his hand on a thick, stained yellow MS. The story of James Port fighting for his own hand down in the Bahamas, carrying letters of marque from King Charles, King James, and King William, and carrying, too, this chart. Eleuthera was his headquarters. There he fitted and refitted for his cruises in the Caribbean, from Barbados to the Island of Pines, and many a bloody fight he fought under Morgan, Gramont, Hamelin, and Ducasse. Yet none suspected the secret of his northern isle, of the great revolving rock under the crane's bill, of the winding stairway in the bowels of the earth, of the long echoing pillared hall carved out by a falling river, where the great treasure chests are stored, sealed to this day with the seal of the old Admiral. But there was never a chance of shipping the treasure of that he and Nicholas Game was certain. And his Nicholas Game was certain, and after 1713 he sped home, and in this house wrote this record and died in peace. But is it there still? Said the elder boy, with the old hunger of his race shining in his eyes. Certain it be, though thrice in these 200 years the chart was stolen, said the old man, holding out his hands to the fire and turning his head as the storm without battered the house. Go on with the story, Nicholas, said James Port, closing the box and putting the keys in his pocket. Captain and I talked for years of a third search. The story of the search being that box. A safe ship, a safe crew, safe journeys. That was what we wanted. Some of the crew be singing beneath us now. Hearken, but many be dead. The old ship lies fathoms deep off Caicos Island, but here we are. Here we be, Nicholas, said James Port cheerily. Dost remember, Captain, how we found the crane, how he pushed the bill and set the great rock swinging, how he went down, 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 well fitted with lights and flares, how he came down on the sandy floor of the hall and reckoned the treasure chests 153, and stood beside the crystal coffer where she lies, and wondered where the light came from and the falling of the waters. Dost remember the figure that came and stood in the light, a thing like the idol of Baal, the thunder of his voice, the crash of the rock above us as it closed, and the echoes like rolling thunder? The old sailor, as he spoke, looked in the firelight like a creature of another world. It were a tight corner. We were prisoners, right enough, said James Port, and as he spoke he felt a boy on each side grip his leg. But here we be, he said cheerily. 2 days and 2 nights we spent in Treasure Cave. How did you get out? Cried the trembling boys. The way the black man got in, by the rock chimney where the light and the water flowed in. 'Twas a fearful climb, and ever behind us the black man crept, with hand ready to clutch us by the feet and drag us back to death. At the last turn I jammed my bow in his chest, and I heard the corpse bouncing from rock to rock and thud on the sand below, said the old man, rehearing the dreadful sound, reliving a supreme moment. The silence of the party as they sat over the fire, thinking of the perils and treasure galore, was broken by the echoing sea shanty from the parlour below. To Caicos from Eleuthera be nigh 100 leagues, of hurricanes and hungry tides that every pirate knows, and biting rocks and lurking shark hold ships in their intrigue. There deep among the coral lies the ship we called the Rose. Was that your ship, father? Said the boys. Yes, said he. What shall we call ours? Said they. The Admiral and the Duchess, said he. We will bring all the money home for mother, said James Port the youngest, but Nicholas must come with us. And the wind of October roaring around the inn swept the black man into the streams of waters that flow to the gulf where the Duchess sleeps, in the caverns of sea-reaped treasures. Now, there's the third story that we've got up here. The Looking Glass of Time. I'm just going to quickly check the chat. Okay. The little seaside town had disgorged its army of visitors and was slowly relapsing into its 16th century sleep. Serene September had gone, and man had returned to his labours in the great towns. First they departed in battalions, then in squads, and last one by one, until there was but a solitary visitor left to face the short evenings and possibly blustering days of chill October. He was a curious-looking man, who might well have belonged to that earlier century which dominated the town when profitable visitors had gone. The visitors came to the town to see the 16th and 17th centuries, but these eluded them while giving them the cold framework of a dead age. They could look at the buildings and the rich brown brick walls with the creeping lichen, but they were of the 20th century, and to them the little town was a museum with a pleasant front to a warm southern sea. But it was not so with the remaining visitor. He was of the age of the town affected from October onwards, and lodging as he did at the Black Sea Dog, that admirable hostelry where James Port held rule, he seemed hardly a visitor, but rather an adopted son of the town, one who might, if he would, have access to and even sit in the Admiral's Chair at the end of the long inn parlour under the ancient portrait of the Admiral who ruled the Spanish Main. All the summer he had stayed at the inn, and had become almost part of the family, a stately Elizabethan-looking man, with trim sunburned auburn beard and clear shrewd eyes beneath a noble brow, but a taller man than James Port and more authoritative. He knew all the family stories, while even the secrets of the gold in the caverns of Eleuthera were his, and he and James Port often talked of the days after the war, the days now near at hand, when they together would sail the isle where the Admiral's treasure lay hidden. James Port, usually keen and suspicious about strangers, had no suspicions of this man, come whence no one knew, on business that no one guessed nor tried to guess. He seemed almost to treat James Port as though the landlord had served under him in other days, and it is certain that Port treated his visitor with respect that betokened some secret affinity and some sense of duty and service. There was something about the stranger that made the face familiar to everyone, and yet no one guessed why it was familiar. He was as much at home with the fishermen, who were the lifeboatmen, and sat on evening in their long candlelit parlour, as he was with James Port. But there was always, even in his familiarity and close knowledge of the seamanship and their lives, something that placed him at the high table of life, the little something that set him apart, while the men felt drawn to the smiling and yet austere personality. So the last visitor lingered on into the chill but wonderful month of October. 3 times since 1713 have the chart and key been stolen, and each time the black man has left something in their place. James Port was speaking once again of the old quest of the family party in the long panelled room above the inn parlour, where the old fishermen were chanting under the shadow of the Admiral's Chair. There were the boys and girls, and Mrs. Port and old Nicholas Game. The only addition was a stranger who had so strangely entered into their confidence. "But he did leave anything last year beside the foreign money, the old Blanco," said the elder boy. "We did not know it at the time, but I found it soon after. He carried it on that stormy night, just as such a night as this, and left it behind the Admiral's Chair, a long flat thing wrapped in matting that had been round it, I should say, for untold years, so mildewed and rotten it was. I have saved it against this night, this 13th of October, that we might open it together. You are here, friend, on a strange occasion." "Yes," said the visitor, "it is a strange story. I seem somehow to know it all, as if I had sailed with the Admiral and your ancestor. But come, let us see the treasure." "Fetch it, Nicholas," said Port. "It is probably nothing at all." It felt like a wooden thing. The wind was calling as Nicholas Game hobbled out of the room, calling like a voice from the infinite deeps of time. "The sound of the wind seems to awaken memories in me," said the stranger. "I am sure that my ancestors sailed with yours, my friend. I have family stories too, and they are full of memories of the Main, and 1 or 2 relics have come down. Look at this miniature." They looked at the loveliest face ever limned by man. "Who was it? Who painted it?" asked Mrs. Port. "I do not know that I can tell. It is said to be an ancestress of mine, but here is Nicholas with his mystery. The old man almost stumbled with his mouldy load of matting, a long oblong thing, and the wind moaned and the sea broke under the fitful moon. "I will open it," said James Port, "but I have no expectations of anything beautiful or useful." The black man intended nothing for us. It was some flotsam he found too heavy to carry farther. But let us see. The packaging was not so easily cut away. No one rapping, but many hid the secret, and as it was torn and hacked away, the smell of lost ages, of hidden things belonging to other generations, filled the room. The men smoked in something like tension. The girls and their mother sniffed with curiosity, with affected repulsion. Soon the last coating of fibre, plainly from southern isles, was reached and swiftly torn away, to reveal a great mirror untarnished, in a costly framework that recalled the great chair below, and bearing beyond doubt the Admiral's arms. James Port smote his forehead. The stranger looked puzzled, and his eyes fixed on the seaward window seemed to search the secrets of the backwards of time. There is something about this mirror in some of the writings in the chest. Shall we open the chest? You have not seen the iron chest, my friend. Here it is. It be safely kept now, Nicholas, he added with a smile as they recalled the fright of last year. While you are looking at the old story, I shall put the mirror up whenever we can see it as its best, said the visitor. Do, said Mrs. Port, and the tall man carried the great-looking glass to a place on the wall opposite the sea window. There he and Nicholas fixed it, while James Port and the others searched in the old MS for its history. Here it is, cried James Port, the youngest. This is what was written by someone. There did hang in the sight of the great carved chair a looking-glass framed curiously, and therein did the Admiral look when he did take his ease, for, said he, this is the remembrancer of time, the recorder of things good and evil, and men said that he beheld therein the vision of things fulfilled. The visitor listened, a look of rapt attention filling his luminous eyes. Let us see, said he, if there is any legend inscribed anywhere on this strange piece of furniture. He closely scanned the old frame, and presently he gave a start, for he had found on the top in the place beneath the carved arms some Latin words, evidently a legend. He puzzled, and at length made out the lines, Sum speculum, quic quid coram, ne fecerit et cetas, servus scrutane cerne ne cunctadatur. The Port family and old Nicholas Game listened to the strange rhythm. The old Spanish, I suppose, said Nicholas. Yes, in a way, said the visitor. It is early Latin. Are there any rhymes in the book about the mirror? Look, James, my boy. The boy looked eagerly and at last found it. Is this it? Time's looking glass am I, to give I give, to time I give. His moments back and all that is in... I'll start again. Time's looking glass am I, to time I give. His moments back and all that in them live. If you but look with fated eyes, behold, to you I render all things new and old. Yet that is a rough rendering of the Latin. But what does it all mean, said Mrs. Port. Well, I think we must find that out tomorrow. It is getting very late. Mrs. Port took the hint, and she and the children departed, leaving the men with the strange mirror. The storm had passed away, and James Port, throwing open the great windows, looking out to sea, watched the moon shining upon the waters. It is peaceful enough tonight, friend. We might almost be on a ship becalmed off an island in the Spanish Main. It is too hot, quite breathless, more like August than October. Then he turned and, looking at the old sailor and the new friend, said, Do you suppose that this old mirror has anything out of the common about it? Yes, I am sure of it. I have heard the old Admiral, of whom you have often talked so much, whose chair is in the parlour, whom my ancestors served. And mine, said fixedly at the mirror. The fishermen are still singing downstairs. It is not so late as I thought. Shall we all watch the mirror and see what there is to see, and then tell each other what we have seen? Each will see what his soul brings to see. Yes, said Port. I am more curious than I can say. So they each sat where they could see the mirror and the reflection of the moonlit sea in its placid silver surface. As they watch, they hear the fishermen sing, From Calais to Eleuthera it is 100 leagues, and a bloody were the battles that we fought in waters grey. But now it is the moonlight forgotten. But now it is But now it is the moonlight, forgotten our fatigues. We dead men are assailing till the breaking of the day. While the three watchers were looking intently at the mirror, young James Port came gliding into the room. I must see, said he, and they let him stay. Nicholas Games sat and smoked and watched the mirror. Presently a change passed over the alert old face. It grew younger, sterner. He saw moving on the waters a boat with muffled oars. He saw looming ahead of it a gigantic galleon. It is the San Philippe, he heard himself say. He bent on the oar, he put his whole being into the silent work. They were under the becalmed ship. With drawn weapon, he and James Port and a great company, for other silent boats had glided up, were swarming the sides of the great ship. He heard the alarm, the bugle, the hoarse cries of the men-at-arms, the boom of musketry and the shout of triumph. He saw the Admiral charging with Port at his side. He pressed on and joined them, and they three alone, cut off from their company, flung themselves on the Admiral of the treasure fleet and his guard. He is reacting the Homeric fight. He is reacting the Homeric fight. Dead men fall around him in the moonlight. He has seized an axe and cleaves a circle around the admirals now face to face. Round and round he races with his terrible weapon, and none dares first lest their own admiral be struck. And none dares fire lest their own admiral be struck. The duel begins in the silver light, and behind him in the roar of his oncoming comrades from the bloody waist of the ship. Then he sees almost too late a figure, stiletto in hand, fling himself at the back of the Admiral. With supreme exultation, he is in time himself to receive the blow. And as he falls, he hears the cry of surrender, the rattle of the flinging down of arms. A mist passes over the mirror, and Nicholas Gain, putting his hand before his eyes, awakens to his own age, and bloody were the battles that be fought in waters grey. James Port is watching the mirror. Presently he sees a room or cabin with a great table and many charts, and seated at the table is the Admiral. Behind him, watching the scene, is a beautiful woman, and in a moment he realizes that it is the woman of the miniature. Then he sees himself leaning over the table. We are trapped in this harbour, said the Admiral. You know the banks and tides. Is there any way out? Then Port and the Admiral worked at the charts until it was clear that there was no way but one, a passage through to an unwatched, because apparently inaccessible seaway to the south. Only at rare tides could the water carry them. The fates fight for us, cried the Duchess. The tide is flowing low. Let me be steerwoman. I have a light, strong hand. The Admiral looked doubtfully at Port. Port had no doubt. Angels before now have won battles, he said. The Spanish fleet beyond the bar, sure of its prey, sure of the great Admiral of the Main, were content with occasional salvos of artillery. The attempt to force the harbour with boats was beyond the courage of their leaders in the night. Tomorrow they reckoned on overwhelming the Admiral before he was joined by his own fleet. The full moon made the tropic night not light as day, but, as the Duchess said, light as heaven. They must move before the tide was at the full. The channel was narrow, reefy, sandy. A wrong touch meant destruction. She was in command. She had learned her lesson from the charts, and soon they were under way, gliding across the harbour and steering for a point that seemed a wall of rock, a point hid in deep shadow of overhanging trees. There was wind enough to give them way. In a moment they were out of the harbour and moving past a belt of great tropical trees into a channel only broad enough for the ship, but swimming with the great spinning tide. It seemed like a phantom ship moving over the land, and the steerswoman was, as it were, an angel at the helm, alert with the finesse of wrist and swiftness of eye that saved the ship, moment by gliding moment, from imminent peril of needle rock and shifting sand. Presently she called Port and bade him take the tiller. We are through, said she. There is the Spanish fleet. Look far in the offing, and there is the open sea. What did I say? Said Port to the Admiral, as they stood southwest for the Bahamas. Port saw in the mirror flowing seas, as the ship leapt on in freedom from all fear, and a mist passed across the mirror. It was England again. The visitor looked at the mirror. He knew well what he would see. The Admiral was sitting in his chair facing the magic mirror and watching the fleeting vision of a splendid court. and the Duchess, standing by, had her hand on his shoulder, while he saw himself the centre of the glittering scene. "You have given all for me, fame, rank, the splendour of France and Spain, the glories of queenship, the satisfaction of power. You have given all for the sake of a fugitive from the Inquisition." "And what have I gained?" said she. "Have I not gained something greater than worldly honour, earthly power, transient possession? There is no hardship in love, and there is eternity in which to cherish it. And we have fought together for a better Spain, a better world. Come up on deck." Then they watched the moonlight on the quiet seas, and in the eternities around them they forecast the eternities of love. The visitor turned from the mirror. He knew it all. They had sprung from that marriage. He had sprung from that marriage and had inherited her ideals. "What did you see, boy?" he said to young James. "I do not see the past at all, I think, sir. I saw a wonderful ship, a ship of old time, and I was steering it, and as I steered, you and the wonderful lady whose picture you have, and father and old Mr. Games stood around me. And as we went, we passed islands and lands where everyone was happy. We steered right into a beautiful world where men and women were beautiful also. I think it was a dream." And as he stopped, he heard the sailormen below singing their chanting, "From Calais to Eleuthera is nigh 100 leagues, of shining waters, fair and sweet, where many ships do lie. The dead men they have thrown aside from earth's sorrows and intrigues, and death is more than silence, for the mirror cannot lie." And now we have the final story of this particular sequence, that being Golden Galliass. The little seaside town had still, at the beginning of another year, some of its visitors, and among them was the descendant of the old Spanish Admiral, whose chair stood still in the old parlour at the Black Sea Dog hostelry. Having found by chance a spot so strangely associated with his family life and traditions, he had become a constant visitor and found there new interest and new use for leisure. An Englishman by virtue of many generations, he and his family had never entirely lost touch with Spain, and in his successful ventures as a merchant with large shipping interests, he had made it his business to link himself up with the Spanish branch of his family, descendant as he was of a kingly stock. At last, when success had given him the right to leisure, he had interested himself in many stories of Spanish settlements in England arising from the landing of wrecked crews from ships of the Armada. That those alleged settlements were largely legendary, he was convinced, yet here and there, on this or that English or Irish coast, he had come across villages where there seemed to be a strong Spanish or even Moorish strain, villages whose inhabitants were utterly different from the people of neighbouring villages, swarthy, black-haired folk who never intermarried with the fair-haired, rosy people around them. It was after examining such a village that he had come to the Black Sea Dog and discovered Jamesport and his stories and his magic mirror. His wife and children were no less interested than he in the whole story, and this September they too were staying in the town, though not at the inn, since quarters there were restricted. But the children were in and out of the inn all day, and the port youngsters found them ready recipients of all the old stories. They handled the pieces of eight and longed for piles of the Spanish dollars and dreamt of multitudinous ingots of gold, wondered at the silken rope in the drawer beneath the Admiral's chair, and peered 100 times at the portrait of the Admiral hanging against the black oak at the long parlour. The children were weaving wonders all the day long and dreaming them all night. Romance had come their way and was casting its golden nest around them. From a hungry sense of romance to a vivid bout of conspiracy is but a step, and they, one and all, took the step, and with them the sturdy old mariner, Nicholas Game. The boys and girls felt that he was one of them, and were shrewd enough to realize that he had the brains, the experience, the ready hands, and the sympathetic heart necessary for them in the adventure that they had planned. With him, romance was a profession which he had practiced all his life, and yet, strangely enough, he had not realized that it was unnecessary to go down into the Spanish Main to find it. It and the Spaniards and their galleons and their gold lay right in front of his cottage door, and he, when his old sea eyes were wistfully watching the sea line, and his old sea heart was far away in Caicos or Eleuthera, was looking right past the magic spot, and was leaving unheeded the treasures of his was looking right past the magic spot, and was leaving unheeded the treasures at his very door. So familiar was the spot, so commonplace to his eyes was the rocky island in the bay, not 7 miles out, that it had never occurred to him that a lugger could carry him in an hour to a place not less wonderful than Eleuthera itself. It was the children who told him, children who were so hungry for romance that they were ready to look for the pearl of great price and the oyster of their own shore. Little pitchers of long ears, Sebastian, the eldest boy, and Mariana, the eldest girl, had sat at their father's feet, apparently heedless of anything, while he talked to his wife of the strange colony of indubitable Spaniards in the village up the bay, and of the fact that an offshoot, so he suspected, of the village farmed the island. They heard him putting, as he said, 2 and 2 together. Was the black man who visited the inn, who brought such mysterious messages and gifts, who beyond doubt stole the chart? Was he a foreigner, a Carib after all? They strolled with him along the shore in the sunset, and looked with his eyes at the shore. And looked with his eyes at the island, which lay a golden sea league or more clear up the point where the galleon foundered, where the U-boat slept. To their eyes the island became an enchanted land, wonderful in its rare beauty, as it lay like an inscrutable gem gleaming on the wine-dark sea. The shape of the island, with its clear-cut little peaks, its iron shores where the ground-swell ever broke in lines of snow, its green and purple patches clear enough even with the naked eye, and plainly field and moor under the glass, fascinated them. They longed to live in the group of cottages which formed the island's city. To rule over such an island were kingship enough, or so would they rule over the whole kingdom of romance, whose subjects are all who yearn for the unattainable, who hunger to do impossible deeds, who would save all who are lost, who would lose all that is vile, who would achieve all goodness in seeking all beauty, the lords of April and the queens of May. There was a common yearning in the eyes not only of Sebastian and Mariana, of Arthur, Harry, and Perdita, of Alice Port and John Port, of Esther Port and Alfred Port, but in the eyes, when they told him their suspicion and began to conspire with him, of Nicholas Game. He smote his thigh, he chewed his twist, and he danced a sea dance, waving a bottle in the very presence of Mrs. Game. "Be thee mad, father?" said the lady, who knew how restless her old husband had become with the advent of peace, and feared that it was a signal for the Spanish Main. "He be owed for such like fooleries. Sit ye down, O wench," he said, "and list." And he held up his great left hand as though he might be overheard, and whispered in a voice that could be heard far out at sea. The old dame nodded approvingly. "It be near at hand," she said, "and maybe there's money in it." "Money," he whispered, in megaphone fashion. "Money, 'tis more than money, 'tis hunger of heart. But there, women will not understand, though they be at the bottom of all." "I do understand," quoth she, her wizened apple face blushing with anger, "and I am a bore with the rest of the childer. But this carries us too fast. It summarizes in a greedy flash days of delicious conspiracy, evenings of twilight mystery, when many pairs of eyes were fixed in dizzy anticipation on the Cassitadarian Isle, that fragment of Atlantis which was all their hope. Romance had come down onto the shores of a materialistic land, come down winged as the seabirds are, singing as the sirens sing, laughing as the soft south wind laughs, an elusive creature dancing on the shores and yearning with the supple arms as Dido might have yearned, out of the delectable isle where the unknown king of unknowable things kept royal court remote from the sons and daughters of men. Nonsense enough, no doubt, for those who have never felt the passion of romance, who have never soared out of the counting-house among the countless stars, who have been content with the adjustable hive and its honey and its routine. Nonsense for them, but not to those who hunger and thirst for the unknown. There were days of preparation involving the collection of victuals, of weapons, of spare sails, of a shop full of bolts and bars, oars, and all the spare parts of a romantic venture, barrels of water, photographic apparatus, a diving suit, whence no one knows, supposed to have been stolen from government stores, fowling pieces, several, fishing tackle, an old Spanish word book, 2 volumes of Robinson Crusoe, 7 swords, rusty, a bag of tools borrowed, a few pieces of 8 from the drawers, 2 small cannons unsafe, and a little keg of powder, a dozen hammocks on loan, mother's medicine chest stolen, a box of draughts, a dozen family photographs, 5 eider-downs, a slate, 2 compasses, a hot water bottle, 3 pairs of field glasses, 2 telescopes, a looking glass, new, a fountain pen, and 2 bottles of rum, old. So they departed at midnight, when the moon was full, with just enough breeze to carry the good lugger Ariel to alien shores. There was never such a voyage before in the history of romance. Mrs. Game was in the prow with all the girls nestled behind her. Mother Carey's chickens, she called them. Mr. Game was at the helm with 5 bandits around him and a bottle of rum in his immediate vicinity. For the look of the thing, he said to the boys as he wiped his mouth with the back of his hairy hand. Jacob's ladder is based on earth. To those who have sailed under a moonful sky, with a bellyful of wind and a gurgle of tide, with a ragged rim of cloud on the far horizon and a clean touch of wind in the mouth, there is nothing to tell. They know the pull of the boat, the quick click of the water, the pallor of the stars, the sense of mystery. They see on the skyline the strange shape of the isle. They feel the desolation of the waste of waters under the rippling moon, the sound of breakers of the departing coast, the warm light of the far-off sea-bound ship, the clip of the sail as the boat swings round, the flickering of the moonlight from the approaching coast, the cry of a bird awakened from its billowed sleep, the deep under-murmur of the eternal sea. So they drew on the warm September night, and one by one the Mother Carey chickens fell asleep and the boys nodded in the swooning twilight of romance. Nicholas Game never nodded. He pulled away at his pipe, and he skilfully approached the isle at one spot where landing was possible. The beach, the only beach, came up at him on the twilight sea, and he drove the boat at it with unhesitating eye. It was a moment of difficulty, a few yards, and he would have split the ship on a needle-point, but he soon felt it grounding in deep sand, and his gruff voice echoed his relief. The boys were alive in a moment. Sleep slipped out of their eyes as night slips out of the dawn of the breathless line. What shall we do? They whispered as they looked down on the shore and saw shadowy figures moving in the dusk. Take the tiller, cast the anchor, bring the bottle. Before the last word was ended, they saw the rotund figure clambering down. It was useless to take tiller. Mrs. Game had cast the anchor and the bottle had gone. So they climbed down onto the silver sands. There they stood in a group, and presently they were joined by the girls, and they heard strange voices in the street. I'm going to check chat now. There we go. And I'm just going to actually pronounce this correctly. There we go. And they heard strange voices speaking in a strange tongue, and heard Nicholas himself speaking in tones of authority and in a foreign tongue. The night was breathless. A hot sea wind came up from the south. Warm lightning opened hard on the inscrutable sky, a benediction above the setting moon. In a few moments 2 of the inhabitants of the isle came before the children, bade them welcome, invited them to the farm, but in such strange dialect as made the words seem almost foreign, laughed at their shyness, pointed over the rocks to the left, and said something about spring tides and hidden ships. They were dropping with sleep and nodded their heads, dreaming that they dreamt, and before they knew where they were in a great farm kitchen, drinking hot milk and eating cakes, while Nicholas expounded to the stately farmer's wife the wonders of the Spanish Main, and showed her coins which she matched from a box of black oak from the back of the great hearth. The party were expected. Nicholas had seen to that, and when the children were packed away asleep, the big boys in the layhoff for the look of the thing, Nicholas laughed, and Mr. Morey the farmer laughed, and Mrs. Morey, as she fried a dish of bacon and mushrooms, laughed. Boys will be boys, said Mrs. Game. At that time of life, things unlooked for are indeed things. We old ones, we take our victuals and we old ones, we take our victuals and be content. Be sure, said Mr. Game, for I thinking the unlooked for things be common for us, the glass be falling like rain. Mr. Morey, the great black-haired farmer, looked anxious. It would be strange, he said softly, if it did happen. What will happen? Said Mr. Game with an eager look. The stripping of the old ship. What old ship? The old ship the young gentry came for to see. Be there ship? Said Nicholas hoarsely. It be 20 fathom deep, but there be ship. My grandfather he walk her deck, and see dead men on the dead days. 'Twere 80 year agone. The sea had changed, the moon had gone. The red dawn was breaking on a heavy sea, and had called up a blood-red angry sky, where the lightning stabbed the racing stars. I never see such a fall in the glass before, nor in the China seas, says Nicholas. The end of the world be come, and I be in the charge of these poor sleeping souls. The farmer's wife looked at him with flashing scorn out of her great southern eyes. They will remember, she said. You will forget. I will remember too, said Mrs. Graham. Nicholas be too old to remember, and he be too fond of the bottle. Wake the children, said the Spanish-eyed woman, and follow me. 'Twere below the quay grandfather saw the ship. The great adventure had come. In an instant they were awake, eager and fresh, and faced the darkling dawn with the eyes of hungry delight. There were no rain, but some strange workings of the sea told of a paroxysm in the deep. A curious calm lay around the enchanted isle, while they thought that the coast hidden in cloud not 10 miles off was in the clutch of a sudden sea spasm. The heaving water was evidence enough, and though the ebb tide was about to turn, the water suddenly fell away beyond the outer rocks, and there in the deep chasm of the fugitive sea lay a ruined ship of ancient days. Last time in grandfather's days it were exposed for 3 hours or more. Come, Mr. Game, bring them along. We can all swim like ducks, said the youngest girl, except Mrs. Game. I can float, said she. So they moved down into the waters as confident as the Israelites of old. It was a strange sight. The gradual descent was smooth, hard sand, but on the bottom little pools dotted the smooth surface besides innumerable needle rocks. The sudden flight of the seal had left myriads of crawling creatures of huge eels, gasping fish of immense size, heaving flat monsters, and scattered on the sand were hundreds of weapons of war, pikes, halberd, partisans, boarding weapons, swords, musket, culverin, small cannon, double cannon, great pieces. Among the weapons, clinging to spurs of rock, were many skeletons of men. The rocks had anchored treasure enough, and there were small casks scattered about the spurs. It was a desolate spectacle, lighted by the blood-red dawn. The most remarkable sight, however, was not the debris of the perished weapons and impedimenta of war. A jut of rock running down from the beach forked above the sandy bottom, and grasped in the fork was an immense golden ship, plainly not a galleon, but something unfamiliar even to the eyes of Nicholas Game, who was a master with diving work. The party stopped and looked in horror at the ship. A great terror seized them. What did it mean? A familiar voice behind them said almost roughly, "It is the famous golden galleass San Pedro." It was James Port, and with him was the visitor at the inn. The children looked round with relief, though they knew not that they had conspired in vain. "The girls, anyway, ought to go back," said James Port. "I don't think so," said the visitor. "It is terrible, but it is history, the sort of history that the new generation must help to unmake. We will lead, though I doubt if we shall go far. The tide will overcome the convulsions in a very short time. But come, it is worth taking. It is a risk worth taking." The children and Mrs. Game followed. The horror of the thing was that the oarsmen, 300 of them, were still at the oars, chained to the banks, 300 dead men down in Dead Man's Land. The blood-red dawn tinted the bleached skeletons, the bony hands clutching the great oars, the skulls peering out, the spines thrown back, as if in some last vast effort to save the ship, to crash it ashore. The effort had failed. The seas had swollen the Galliass, had littered the deep, and the sands had sucked in, and its mariners and its soldiers, its slaves, its admiral, its priests, into the bosom of the deep. It and its chapels, chambers, turrets, pulpits, banks of oars, its cases of gold and cargo of pearls, its eternal hopes and fears, even its figurehead of St. Peter walking on the deep. It was a sight of unspeakable horror and desolation. Suddenly James Port cried out, "There is someone living on the ship." They saw three figures moving, and a hollow laugh broke from the islanders. Mrs. Game and the two elder boys were moving amid the banks of oars, and the dead men dragging a small square chest by its leather bands. They had slipped down unseen and dared the terror in the true spirit of romance, to snatch some scrap of lost treasure, some memory of a deathless day. Everyone envied and cheered the adventurers, and especially the quaint rotund figure of Mrs. Graham, who looked up from the chasm and waved her hand in humorous fashion. The human touch redeemed all sorrow, and yet at this very moment horror and tragedy reached a crisis. For as the explorers found the helm and were climbing down, having hurled their box onto the sand, the ship back, the oars swung to backwater, and the 300 whitened chained skeletons bent forward as if live to their eternal task. The tide was racing in a wall of water. It had reached the wreck, but had been forestalled by a ground swell which hurled the ship toward it. With one great sighing heave, the Galliass leant forward and plunged into an everlasting tomb of sand. The wall of sea seized the old woman, the boys in their box, and hurled them up the sandy slope into the midst of the anxious watchers, and for a moment of inextricable confusion all seemed lost. Yet all was well. The sea sank again to its level, the sky in a moment had cleared, the mainland shone out a line of passionless peace in the tremendous dawn. It was morning, and the events of the troubled night would have seemed but a marvellous dream of romance, had not Mrs. Graham there and then begun to unpack the veritable treasure trove at her feet. That was the last story of this particular collection, I believe. So that was basically all I had prepared. I had thinking of a few more things, but I'm not certain. And the sort of the dud at the beginning of this stream slightly dispirited me a bit. I'm actually thinking that the next stream was going to be the reading of another short novella. I'm thinking of either something by Andreev or something else I covered on the channel that I'm not going to spoil just yet. But we can see. So yes, that would basically be the stream for now, unless, of course, you want me to continue, in which case I could probably find something else to read a little bit. So I'm just going to go through here. So let me think. I will definitely have to. I believe I will read one or two short yarns by my John Masefield to round us out. But before I do need to get to the bathroom again. I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. Now to drink a little something. Okay, now then. Let's go and make sure to not touch this with wet hands. Now, there we go. I'm trying to find the title image. There we go. Now then, what I can do is turn this off because I don't need it at the moment. We can read a couple more John Masefield for a bit. So let me just find where I actually had it open. There we go. Sea Superstition. One moonlit night in the tropics, as my ship was slipping in south under all sail, I was put to walking the deck on the lee side of the poop with orders to watch the ship's clock and strike the bell at each half hour. It was a duty I had done nightly for many nights, but this night was memorable to me. The ship was like a thing carved of pearl. The sailors, as they lay sleeping in the shadows, were like august things in bronze, and the sky seemed so near me. I felt as though we were sailing under a roof of dim branches, as of trees that bore the moon and the stars like shining fruits. Gradually, however, the peace in my heart gave way to an eating melancholy, and I felt a sadness such as has come to me but twice in my life. With the sadness came a horror of the water and of the skies, till my presence in that ship, under the ghastly corpse light of the moon, among that sea, was a terror to me past power of words to tell. I went to the ship's rail and shut my eyes for a moment, and then I opened them to look down upon the water rushing past. I had shut my eyes upon the sea, but when I opened them, I looked upon the forms of the sea spirits. I looked upon the forms of the sea spirits. The water was indeed there, hurrying up as the ship cut through, but in the bright foam for far about the ship I saw multitudes of beautiful, inviting faces that had an eagerness and a swiftness in them, unlike the speed or the intensity of human beings. I remembered thinking that I had never seen anything of such passionate beauty as those faces, and as I looked at them, my melancholy fell away like a rag. I felt longing to fling myself over the rail, so as to be with the inhuman beauty. Yet even as I looked, that beauty became terrible, as the night had been terrible but a few seconds before. And with the changing of my emotions, the faces changed. They became riddled and hag-like. It literally says riddled, not withered. So I've never heard of it. And in the leaping of the water as we rushed, I saw malevolent white hands that plucked and snapped at me. I remembered I was afraid to go near the rail again before the day dawned. Not very long after that night, when I was sitting with a Danish sailor who was all broken on the wheel of his vices and not far from his death, I talked about the sea spirits and their beauty and their wildness, feeling that such a haunted soul as my companions would have room in its crannies for such wild birds. He told me much that was horrible about the ghosts who throng the sea, and it was he who gave me the old myth of the seagulls, telling me that the souls of old sailors follow the sea in birds' bodies till they have served their apprenticeship or purged their years of penitence. He told me of two sailors in a Norway bark, though I believed he lied when he said he was aboard with her at the time, who illustrated this sermon very aptly. The bark was going south from San Francisco, bound home round the Horn, and the two men were in the same watch. Somehow they'd fell to quarrelling as to which was the better dancer, and the one killed the other and flung him overboard during one of the night watches. The dead body did not sink, said my friend, because nobody dares to sink to the undersea during the night time. But in the dawn of the next day, and at the dawns of each day, till the bark reached Norway, A white gull flew at the slayer, crying the cry of the gulls. It was the dead man's soul, my friend said, getting her revenge. The slayer gave himself up on his arrival at the home port, and took poison while awaiting trial. When he had told me this tale, the Dane called for a tot of the raw spirits of that land, though he must have known, he being so old a sailor, that drink was poison to him. When he had swallowed the liquor, he began a story of one of his voyages to the States. He said that he was in a little English ship coming from New York to Hamburg, and that the ship, the winds being the winds being westerly, was making heavy running under upper topsails nearly all the voyage. When he was at the wheel with his mate, for two men steered in the pitch and hurrying of that sailing, he was given to looking astern at the huge comber known as the following sea, which topples up, green and gristly, astern of every ship with the wind aft. The sight of that water has a fascination for all men, and it fascinated him, he said, till he thought he saw in the sinking wave the image of an old, halt man who came limping, bent on a crutch, in the ship's wake. So vivid was the image of that cripple, he leaned across the wheelbox to his mate, bidding him to look, and his mate looked and immediately went white to the lips, calling to the saints to preserve him. My friend then told me that the cripple only appears to ships foredoomed to shipwreck, and he said we were run down in the channel and sunk in 10 minutes by a clumsy tramp from London. After a while I left that country in a steamer whose sailors were of nearly every nation under the sun, and from a Portuguese aboard her I got another yarn. In the night watches, when I was alone on the poop, I used to lean on the taffrail to see the water reeling away from the screws. While loafing in this way one night, a little while before the dawn, I was joined by the Portuguese, an elderly wizened fellow who wore earrings. He said he had often seen me leaning over the taffrail, and had come to watch me, warn me that there was danger in looking upon the sea in that way. Men who looked into the water, he told me, would at first see only the bubbles and the eddies and the foam. Then they would see dim pictures of themselves and of the ship. But as the last they always saw some unholy thing, and the unholy thing would lure them away to death. And it was a danger, he said, that no young man should face, for though the other evil spirits, those of the earth and air, had power only upon the body, the evil spirits of the sea were deadly to the soul. There was a lad he had known in Lisbon, who had gone along the coast in a brig, and this lad was always looking into the sea, and had at last seen the unholy things, and flung his body to them across the rail. The brig was too near the coast, and it blew too freshly inshore for the sailors to round to pick him up, but they found the lad in Lisbon when they got home. He said he had sunken down into the sea till the sea opened about him, and showed him a path among a field of green corn. He had gone up the path and come at last to a beautiful woman, surrounded by many beautiful women, but the one seemed to him to be their queen. She was so beautiful, he said, the sight of her was like strong wine. But she shook her head when she saw him, as though she could never give him her love, and immediately he was at the surface under the skies, struggling towards some rocks a little distance from him. He reached the shore and went home to Lisbon in a fisher boat, but he was never quite sane after seeing that beauty beneath the sea. He became very melancholy, and used to go down to Tagus in a rowboat, singing to himself and looking down into the water. Before I left that ship, I had to help clean her for her decent entry to the Mersey. I spent one afternoon with an old man from the Clyde doing up some iron work, first with rope yarns and paraffin, then with red lead. The mate left us to ourselves all the watch, because the old man was trusty, and we had a fine yarn together about the things of the sea. He said that there was some who believed in the white whale, though it was all folly their calling him the king of all the fishes. The white whale was nothing but a servant, and lay low, somewhat nigh the poles, till the last day dawned. And then, said the old man, He's a busy man raising the wrecks. When I asked him who was the king of all the fishes, he looked about to see that there was no listeners and said in a very earnest voice that the king of the fish was the sea serpent. He lies coiled, said the old man, in the hot waters of the gulf, with a gold crown on his head and a great sleep upon him, waiting till the settling of the last sun. And then? I asked, and then, he answered, there'll be fine times going for us sailors. That was that particular story. We've already gone through the yarn of Lanky Job. I don't believe I really liked from the Spanish, but let me see. So there was that one. I do believe that I can still do at least one more. I can do at least one more, and let me just go through this if I can find it. I'm just wondering if from the Spanish was any good. I remember it not thinking it very notable back in the day. Let me just see. The Seal Man, we already read that one. I'm just going to go. Oh, remember the Western Islands. How long is that one? That's not that long. Okay. Once there were two sailors, and one of them was Joe, and the other one was Jerry, and they were fishermen. And they'd a young apprentice fella, and his name was Jim. And Joe was a great one for his pot, and Jerry was a wonder at his pipe, and Jim did all the work, and both of them banged him. So one time Joe and Jerry were in the beer house, and there was a young parson there telling the folk about foreign things, about plants and that. Ah, he says, what wonder there are in the West. What sort of wonders, begging your pardon, sir, says Joe. What sort of wonders might there be? Why, all sorts of wonders, said the parson. Why, in the West, he says, there's things you wouldn't believe. No, you wouldn't believe, not till you'd seen them, he says. There's diamonds growing on the trees and great golden glittering pearls as common as pea straw, and there's islands in the West. I could tell you of them. I'd rather guess there's islands. None of your Isles of Man, none of your Alderney and Sark, not in them seas. What sort of islands might they be, begging your pardon, sir, said Jerry. Why, he says, the parson fella says, islands as big as Spain, islands with rivers of rum and streams of sarsaparilla, and none of your roses. Rubies and amethysts is all the roses grow in them parts, with golden stalks to them and a big diamond sticks to them, and the taste of pork crackling if you eat them. They're the sort of roses you have in your area, he says. And what else might there be in them parts, begging your pardon, sir, says Joe. Why, he says, this parson says, there's wonders. There's not only the wonders, but miracles. And not only miracles, but spirits. What sort of spirits might they be, begging your pardon, says Jerry. Are they rum and that? When I say spirits, I say the parson fella, I mean ghosts. Of course you do, says Joe. Yes, ghosts, says the parson, and by ghosts I mean spirits, and by spirits I mean white things, and by white things I mean things as turn your hair white. And there's red devils in there, and blue devils there, and a great gold queen waiting for a man to kiss her. And the first man as dares to kiss that queen, why he becomes king, and all her sacks of gold become his. Begging your pardon, sir, says Jerry, but whereabouts might these here islands be? Why, in the west, says the parson, in the west, where the sun sets. Ah, said Jerry and Joe, what wonders there are in the world. Now, after that, neither one of them could think of anything else but these here western islands. So at last they take their smack, and off they go in search of them. And Joe had a barrel of beer in the bows, and Jerry had a box of twist in the waist, and poor little Jim stood and steered abaft all. And in the evenings Jerry and Joe would bang their pannikins together and sing of the great times they meant to have when they were married to the Queen. Then they would clump poor little Jim across the head and tell him to watch out and keep her to her course, or they'd ride him down like you would a main tack. And he'd better mind his eye, they told him, or they'd make him long to be boiled and salted. And he'd better put more sugar in the tea, they said, or they'd cut him up for cod bait. And who was he, they asked, to be wanting meat for dinner when there was that much weevily biscuit in the bread barge? And boys was going to the dogs, they said, when limbs the like of him had the heavens born insolence to want to sleep. And a nice pass things they were coming to, they said, when a lad as they'd done everything for and saved, so to speak, from the workhouse, should go for snivel when they hit him a clip. If they'd said a word when they was hit, when they was boys, they told him, they'd have their bloods drawed and been stood in the wind to cool. But let him take heed, they said, and be a good lad and do the work of 5, and they wouldn't have wonder, they used to say, as he'd be a man before his mother. So the sun shone, and the stars came out golden, and all the sea was a sparkle of gold with them. Blue was the sea, and the wind blew too, and it blew Joe and Jerry west as fast as a cat can eat sardines. And one fine morning the windfall came, and a pleasant smell came over the water like nutmegs out of rum milk punch. Presently the dawn broke, and lo and behold, a rousing great wonderful island, all scarlet with coral and with rubies. The surf that was beating on her sands was shattering into silver coins, into dimes and pesetas and francs and fourpenny bits, and the flowers and the cliffs was all one gleam and glitter. And the beauty of that island was a beauty beyond the beauty of Sally Brown, the lady as kept the beer house. And on the beach of that island, on a golden throne, sat a woman so lovely that to look at her was as good as church service for one. That's the part I got to kiss, said Jerry. Steady and beach her, Jim boy, he says. Run her ashore, lad, that's the party is to be my queen. You've got a neck on you all of a sudden, said Joe. You ain't the Admiral of this fleet, not by a wide road you ain't. I'll do all the kissing as there's any call for. You keep clear, my son. Here the boat ran her nose into the sand, and the voyagers went ashore. Keep clear, is it? Said Jerry. You tell me to keep clear? You tell me again, and I'll put a head on you. I'll make you sing like a kettle. Who are you to tell me to keep clear? I tell you who I am, said Joe. I'm a better man than you are. That's what I am. I'm Joe the Tank from Limehouse Basin, and there's no tinker's donkey boy will make me stand from under. Who are you to go kissing queens? Who are you that talks so proud and so mighty? You've a face on you would make a dagger tired. You look like a seasick caniker that's boxed 7 rounds with a buzzsaw. You've no manners than a hog, and your lip on you would fetch the enamel of a cup. If it comes to calling names, said Jerry, you ain't the only pebble on the beach. Whatever you might think, I tell you, you ain't. You're the round turn and 2 half hitches of a figure of fun as makes the angels weep. That's what you are. And you're the right-hand strand, and the left-hand strand, and the centre strand, and the core, and the serving, and the mauling of a free-stranded, left-handed, poorly worked junk of a half-begun and never-finished odds and ends of a Port-Mahon soldier. You look like a Portuguese drummer. You've a welky red nose that shines like a portside light. You've a face like a muddy field when they've been playing football in the rain. Your hair is an insult and a shame. I blush when I look at you. You give me a turn like the first day to a first voyager. Kiss, will you? Kiss! Man, I tell you, you'd paralyze a shark if you kissed him. Paralyze him, strike him cold. That's what a kiss of yours would do. You ought to have been a parson, said Joe. That's what you ought to have been. There's many who'd have paid for talk like that. But for all your fine talk and for all your dandy language, you'll not come the old soldier over me. No, nor 10 of you. You talk of kissing when there's a handsome young man the likes of me around. Neither you nor 10 of you. To hear you talk, you'd think you was an emperor or an admiral. One would think he was a bishop or a king. One might mistake you for a general or a member of parliament. You might, straight you might. A general, a bishop, or a king. And what are you? What are you, asked you plain, what are you? I'll tell you what you are. Your him has hired himself out as a scarecrow. A cost no one to take you as forecastle hand. Your him has give the colic to a weathercock. Your him has turned old Mother Bombay's beer. Your him has drowned the thick and stole the monkey. Your him has got the medal given him for having a face that made the bull tame. Now don't you cast no more to me, said Jerry, for I won't take no lip from a 12 shilling corner the likes of you are. You're the clippings of old junk with a dagger smoking cigarettes. A swab and a wash-deck broom and half of a pint of paint make a handsome figure of a man than you are. I've been a coy whisk, what they grooms a mule. I've seen a coy whisk, what they grooms a mule with, and it a sweeter face than you got. So stand aside before you put aside. I'm the king of this here island. You can go chase yourself for another. Stand clear, I say, or I'll give you a job that'll make your bells ring. Now, while they were arguing, young Jim, the young apprentice fella, he creeps up to the queen upon the throne. She was beautiful, she was, and she shone in the sun, and she looked straight ahead of her like a waxwork in a show. And in her hand she had a sack full of jewels, and at her feet had a sack full of gold, and by her side was an empty throne ready for the king she married. But round her right hand there was a red snake, and round her right hand there was a blue snake, and the snakes hissed and twisted, and they showed their teeth full of poison. So Jim looked at the snakes, and he hit them with a welt, right and left, and he kissed the lady. And immediately all the bells and the birds of immediately all the bells and the birds of the world burst out ringing and singing. The lady awoke from her sleep, and Jim's old clothes were changed to cloth of gold, and there he was, a king on the throne beside a lady. But the red snake turned to a big red devil who took a hold of Joe, and the blue snake turned to a big blue devil who took a hold of Jerry. And come you here, you brawling pugs, they said, come and shovel sand. And Joe and Jerry took the spades that were given to them, and dig now, said the devils, heave round. Let's see you dig, you scarecrows, and tell us when you've dug to London. Oh, it's called the Western Islands. The Western Islands, from a Mainsail Hall by John Masefield. I'll just sorry. I'll just put this on the screen a bit, so as you can actually tell what it is. Okay, now then, where did I have that thing? Okay. Now, do I want to go on a little bit more than that? I suppose I could, all things being equal. So we have the Western Islands read. We'll probably go through this entire thing. I know I didn't read through the Spanish one. Okay, it one's shorter. If it's not good, then it's not my fault. But let's actually go from the beginning and see which ones I have. That one, that one, that one, that one, that one. So yeah. So let's try from the Spanish if I can actually find it. Well, it is in this book. I just need to get to it. Hold on. It's after. Okay, here we go. From the Spanish. The gallant Spanish road was built in St. Mary of the Bells by the Lord Alva of Meronique. He built her for one of the beauties of the court, whom he loved in a stately manner that was ceremonious like the worship of a relic. Being a rich man, he built her of costly things, of cedar wood from the east, of Indian rosewood, so that each plank of her was sweet to smell. Her fastenings were of wrought silver curiously beaten. The streets of the silver workers rang noisily for a 12-month over the lovely hammering of them. Her decks were beautifully inlaid by the parqueters of Verona, who made in them delicate patterns of coloured woods more brilliant than the seaweeds. The figurehead, carved in a hard wood, was the work of that artist who carved the Madonna in St. James' Church in Seville. It was a design of the Rosa Dei, bursting her golden petals, that the cross might show a rare piece sweetly wrought. The folk came fair to see it. Her sails were of a lined bleached canvas edged with red Cordoba leather. They bore a wreathed intricacy of roses embroidered in crimson or yellow silk by the ladies of Meronique. The roping was of that precious hemp which grows only on the sacred hill in Ingorotti in Luzon, so that an ell of it was worth a Florence crown by the time it reached the Spanish rigger's hands.
Her high stern, that was built in 3 decks, had painted bulwarks, each of which bore some painted history of the sea, each history by some Italian. There one might see Ulysses in his red-beaked galley as he rowed past those piping trolls, the sirens. There was the barge of Antony, hung with purple, taking the Egyptian beauty along the Nilus. There was Saint Brendan Brighthair in his current of holy wood, with his singing monks about him. There was the fishing boat of Peter that was long worshipped by the Galileans when the spring fisheries were in hand. There was the Genoan in his bark, his yellow banner blowing out bravely. There was Arion at his looting. There were the strange sailors of Atlantis, the 7 brothers that love the meadows of the sea as the Arabian poet has set down. Also there was painted lively the great flood, with great waves running fiercely tossed the ark skyward. Opposite thereto was a table of the last day, the sea stilled with drowned mariners made glorious, ascending in triumph for the harping of sainted hosts. Within her, in her cabins, she was wrought with more beautiful things. For in the decks of the cabins were roses worked in parquetry of scarlet logwood, with great leaves in stained fur surrounding the heavy blossoms. The bulkheads were of precious wood, carven in pilasters that had gilded roses at their tops. There was a painting on each cabin wall of Elizabeth with the roses of Mary in the flowered field, or of those hollows that have the rose as their symbol. The doorways were hung with blue arras of Persia, or with grey tapestry, splendid with purple peacocks from the nuns' looms at Ephrata. Each cabin was lit with a silver lamp that swung in gimbals above a mirror. In every cabin was a silver crucifix above an old censer of flowered copper studded with jewels, which sent up scented smoke at every canonical hour. The cabin beams were painted in designs of flowers, but always of red or crimson flowers, such as the rose of poppy, to symbolize love and activity or weakness. Inlaid upon certain parts of the walls, such as those as the carved bed's head, were curious transcripts from Holy Writ in praise of love or verse of the amorous poets such as Ovid or Petrarch. In each cabin was a cabinet like a reliquary for richness, containing the precious books of love written upon vellum in coloured inks by fine penmen to whom an art was religion. There might you see Messer Dante, or some rare scroll sealed in red wax, written in Greek with a tale of Psyche. These books were bound in a green leather, to signify their immortality, while on the cover of each book some jeweller had fashioned a rose in tiny rubies that typified the love of the saints. Now about the decks of this wondrous galleon were stands of curious armour all scrupulously bright. At her ports, which had every one a wreath of painted roses around it, were cannon of polished brass that shone like gold. Above these were the close fights or strips of canvas running the length of the deck, all curiously painted with the Lord Alva's arms in a design of coloured shields that showed the blazonings of his family. The mariners were all Spaniards from Bocagarra, the little port of Meronique fronting the Atlantic. The soldiers were but few in number, some 20 swords from Extremadura, who had been in the Indies and Oviedo. They wore bright armour inlaid with gold. In their helmets they wore jewels or gloves or feathers that were gifts of ladies whom they had served. Their sword belts were of green leather in token of hope. Their swords had every blade of them drawn blood in the defence of beauty. If I had the pens of 20 poets, I might not tell the glory of the stately life they lived on board of the Spanish Rose, the ship built for the Lord Alva's lady. For in lieu of the excesses common to soldiers or shipmen, they would gather about the mast to hear some pleasant singing in praise of love by one of the Provençal poets, of whom the ship carried 9. Or the lutanists would take their viols, playing some sweet music that for its beauty was like a woman's hair. In the twilights at Bocagarra, while the ship was fitting for the sea, those on board of her would gather at the mast with their censers to sing their vespers at the first rising of the evening star. At night, when the moon was up, some of the mariners, coming from the mysterious darkness in the bows, would light the lanterns on the poop, a lantern shaped like a rose. The glass of it was stained crimson, so so that when lit, it burned like a red rose through the darkness. A sight passing arose in beauty. All of these amorous subtleties, all of this extravagance of beauty, was for the Lady Eleuthera of Aymont, the woman whom Lord Alva loved. He had courted her during the months while the ship was being fitted for the sea, for he had vowed to bring his bride home to Maronique by water in a ship fitting her birth. When the Spanish Rose was ready, her crew on board, her bows blessed by the priests, she sailed out from Bocagarra to a noise of singing that mingled with the bells of St. Mary's Church. She reached Aymonte after 3 weeks sailing along the coast, anchoring one sunny afternoon beneath the blossomed orange groves which scent the houses of the port. He was married the next day at the cathedral, while all the bells in the town rang as they ring at Easter in exultation. After a solemn leave-taking, he set sail again, his bride with him, for his home at St. Mary of the Bells. There are 9 rocks submerged at high water, about a league to the southeast of Aymonte harbour. They go by the name of the 9 Drowned Maidens. They are a menace to shipping, but latterly they have been marked by a lighthouse. It is thought that the Lord Alva's pilot had been made merry with Greek wine, though some say the ill steering was done by a knight of the bride's company, who loved the lady too well to suffer her to belong to another. At any rate, the Spanish Rose struck upon the rocks during the noontide, with her gay complement, so like a bed of tulips of brilliant colour, were drinking to the lady's health. She sank in less than a minute in deep corn-blue water with all her company on board. All that was saved of her was an Italian lute, strung with gay silken ribbons, which floated ashore the next day. Less than 10 years ago, when the Ayamonte folk were laying the foundations for their lighthouse, a driver came upon some weeded wreck of her, fairly well preserved, lying on the sand with a sort of grey silt spreading over her like a cloak. He recovered a few relics from her, such as bits of timber, brass nails, or rusty ironwork, which may be seen at the town museum to this day. The scheme for raising her fell through for lack of funds, but it may be that some American millionaire, greedy of dollars, will form a company to strip the wreck. Perhaps some poor Spanish diver, thrusting through into her central cabin, will then come across the bones of those great lovers, in the perished magnificence of their bridal banquet, their bony hands still clutching the cups, their whitened fingers still splendid with the wedding rings.
Sorry, I have a... That was that one. So, and I believe we could still do one more from this collection, as I want to... Yes, we have that, and we have that, and we have that. Now let's see, how many pages is Captain John Ward? So it's 61. Goes to 70. That's maybe a bit long. See how long the next one is. Captain John. Oh, I remember now what this is. I think these are... Yes. And these particular ones, these are biographies of various captains. I remember these not being... This might be interesting. Let me just go through. Oh, yes. Okay, let's try this one. In a castle ruin. Very long ago, said the old man, the castle was owned by a Scotchman named Carr, whose daughter was the most beautiful woman in the world. The name of his daughter was Clelia. She married Andy MacDonald, who came over at the time of the settlement. After her marriage, she lived on the castle with her husband, helping Carr with the land. When Andy had been married about half a year, he was called away to Scotland on business, for he was a great man in Scotland, and at that time there was to be marrying between the royal families of Scotland and England, and he was wanted to carry a banner at the wedding. So he went to Scotland, and when they heard he was coming back, they made all ready for a feast, and they had fires lighted, and all the fiddlers and the pipers came, and the poets came from the back hills making up new songs. Now at last the ship which brought Andy MacDonald came,
round the point yonder, and Andy got ashore, and then the ship rowed away. Then Carr went up to him and asked why he was turning the ship away again. Isn't that the ship you sailed in? He said. Isn't that your own ship? It is not. My own ship's in Scotland. The king took a fancy to her. So then Carr asked him what had become of all the men who had gone with him abroad. And he answered that the king had taken a fancy to them, and that they were all with the king in Scotland, every man jack of them down to Johnny O'Hara, the piper's boy. So Carr wondered a little at that, but said nothing, and they all went up to the castle to the feast. But there was a queer thing that was noticed. There was the little lad of the McLernans running about barefoot among the horses. He was a little wee lad, the nicest lad you would be seeing. So when Andy MacDonald was coming to the castle from the shore, this little McLernan looks at him, and he was near him, and he said to his mother, His honour's ears is pointed. They were pointed just the same as the ears on the terrier. Wasn't it wonderful that no one had ever noticed that before? That he should have pointed ears and no one see it, I'm thinking that was a great wonder. Now after that thing settled down as before. Andy MacDonald lived on with Carr at the castle, and there was nothing much happened except a little child was born to Clelia. And that was a queer thing, the child was. It was a little wee man of a child, and he was born with teeth in him. And the first thing his mother saw of him was that his ears was pointed. And the nurses said that was a great shame, and she so beautiful a mother. There were other things beside that which seemed queer. Andy MacDonald was another sort of man than he had been. He used to go up beyond in the back hills at the time of a new moon. He got a bad name onto him for doing that, but that was nothing to what they caught him doing another time on the back hills beyond the wood there. There's a flat piece there where they used to hold cockfights in the old times. It was a religious place before that, where they did the old religion, and there's still raves in it besides. Like themselves. It was there they caught Andy. It was one twilight they caught him. He was standing on the grass, bowing to a great black goat, and every time he bowed, the goat spoke to him in ancient Irish. Wasn't that a wonderful thing now? There was a strong magic in that, indeed there was. The shepherds didn't say anything, for Andy was a great gentleman, but they thought it a queer thing for all that. And Carr kept wondering all the time what had become of the ship and all the men left behind in Scotland. Now, just about a year after Andy MacDonald had come home, he and Carr and Clelia and a child were sitting on the grass on a carpet looking out over the bay. And it was one evening getting towards sunset, and as they were sitting talking they saw a small boat pulling to in the bay, and Carr said, It's a tired man in that boat, for he was pulling like a crazy man. And Clelia said, It'll be some poor man who has maybe lost his ship. And Andy MacDonald looked hard at the boat and says he, I'll be going in, he said. The evening strikes cold, he says. So he turned and went into the house. There was no one ever saw him again. Now the boat ran ashore on the beach, and the tired man got out of her, and just by those rocks, and he was tired indeed. He could scarce climb up that bank of shingle, so Carr looks hard at him while he says, It's Johnny O'Hara, the piper's boy that was left behind in Scotland. What news, Johnny, he says. So Johnny comes near up to him, and bad news, he says. It's bad news I'm bringing you to this day. Your man is killed, he says. Andy MacDonald is killed. He was killed by the Scotch the day he was to have come home, and I've been a prisoner ever since. So Carr got up to his feet and calls out, Andy, but no one ever came. And Clelia calls out, Andy, but no one ever answered. And they went into the castle, but no Andy was there. And then they know that they had been living with a dragoman, and that the real Andy had been dead a year. When Clelia knew that she'd been living with a dragon man, she went upstairs to a room and took out a kind of dirk she had with a sharp point on it, and she said a prayer first, and then struck herself so that she fell dead. That was in one of the top chambers. It's all fallen in now, this long time. But that was where she killed herself. And when Carr knew that there had been a dragon man, he looked at the child and knew it for a dragon child because its ears were pointed. So he took it up and swung it against the tower wall, against these their corners, until he had killed it. Then he went down the strand yonder to that point of rocks beyond my cabin, and there he drowned himself. That's the point is called Carr's Point to this day. He was the last man to live in the castle here. No one would ever live in it after that, and the floors fell in, and the woodwork was taken, and now there's the ivy on it. So that was that one. Let's see, yeah, that would be the last. I'm thinking that would be the last of the Masefield stories we're going to do today, as well as the last story overall. I was thinking next stream, I'm thinking of reading a short novella all throughout. I'm thinking of something by Andre, or as I said before, about that, what was it called? Or about another thing that I'm not going to reveal. I have a few things I was considering actually, so I'll see how it goes. And now to all the people who will be watching the VOD later, I would ask if you could potentially check the description and hopefully pitch in to help us make rent next month, or rather at the beginning of the next month, because we're currently a bit currently things still stand a bit uncertainly, so we still don't have any great certainty of much of anything just yet. So, but thank you to the people who came in to watch, and I'll see you. I think I'll see you all tomorrow, hopefully. But I might actually just make a proper video finally if I can stop myself from having a messed up sleep schedule as I have. So we'll see. So with that, I'll just say see you all later, and yeah, bye.